All, and for those of you who are watching remotely or on social media, welcome to our work session. This is a monthly work session that we have each month, and so tonight the way we conduct ourselves will be slightly different. The usual introductory pledge and prayer will not be given this evening. We'll go straight into the agenda. But before we do that, I'm pleased that Miss Ashley Knott is with us tonight, our assistant town clerk. So I'm going to ask her if she will call the roll at this time.
Okay. Mayor Marchburn.
I am present.
Mayor Pro Tem Behringer.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I am here.
Okay.
Councilmember Dellinger.
Here.
Councilmember Matthews.
Here.
Councilmember Vance. And Councilmember Singleton.
Here.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And Mr. Vance may be able to join us a little later. I haven't talked to him recently, but hopefully he will. Hopefully he'll be on the line with us. So I declare that we do have a quorum for our meeting this evening. Let me just remind both the council and for others who may be listening that this meeting is being conducted as a remote meeting pursuant to North Carolina Sessions Law 2020-3. So whenever a council member cannot be seen on the screen, that member will identify him or herself by name prior to asking questions. And so participating in deliberations, making motions, and proposing amendments and voting, all those occasions would be a time when the council member needs to identify himself, him or herself, excuse me. So with that being said, all council members should have before them the agenda for our evening's discussion. So I would entertain a motion at this time for adoption of the agenda.
So moved.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Motion made by Mr. Matthews and seconded by Mr. Singleton, I believe. So, Ms. Knott, if you will, again, call the roll, and all those in favor of approving the amendment, please say aye.
Mayor Marchburn.
Since I'm not voting, I'll pass on that. Okay, or I can't.
All right.
All right.
Mayor Pro Tem Behringer.
Aye.
Councilmember Dellinger.
Aye.
Councilmember Matthews.
Aye.
Councilmember Singleton.
Aye.
Okay, I believe that covers. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And so the agenda is adopted and approved. So we'll move right into the first item of business. There are no presentations this evening that I'm aware of, and so we'll go to item D, which are a number of reports that we'll deal with this evening. And at this time, under the heading of benefits renewal, I'm going to recognize our Human Resources Director, Mr. B.D. Seckler.
Thank you, Mayor, very much. Good evening to you. Good evening, council members and everyone on the call. I am pleased tonight to be joined by John Gazarowski and Paul Sidor from Independent Benefit Advisors. The three of us would like to provide you with an overview of our 2021-22 benefits renewal. We have been working over the last 3 or 4 months on the renewal process. We would like to share with you some updates with regards to where we're at, and then also share with you our plans going forward over the next several months as we get ready to update and renew our benefits offerings for July 1st, the start of the 21-22 fiscal year coming up. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I'll go through the slides, and at several different points during the slides, certainly John and Paul may be jumping in to provide some commentary, and certainly feel free if anyone has questions to jump in. I will also reserve plenty of time at the end for any other questions that anyone may have. So again, as I mentioned, here is what we're planning to do. Whoops, sorry. So our plan for the upcoming fiscal year is to continue our vendor relationship with Aetna. We have enjoyed a very strong and productive relationship with them for over 4 years now. Our plan is to continue the use of a reward mechanism for staff to receive 100% town contribution on the monthly staff premiums. In past years, specifically this year that we're currently in, we asked our staff members to be a part of a general health assessment screening, as well as completing a general health assessment questionnaire. Regretfully, with regards to our current situation with COVID, as well as our situation with social distancing, we have decided that for this year, we're going to pull back on the general health screening. So staff members will only be asked to complete the health assessment questionnaire. We're going to continue with our process of using the dual option, which has both a high and a low plan deductible. We're also investigating the consideration of a third option. That third option would have a significantly low monthly premium for the staff member. However, if the staff member were to use the medical services, the out-of-pocket costs, the co-pays, and the deductibles would be significantly higher. So that's another option or another lever that we are exploring to see how we can try and continue to keep our monthly premium costs as well as our healthcare costs as low as absolutely possible. This next slide is a little bit busy, but I would suggest that you look at the far right-hand column, which is titled Loss Ratio. What we're trying to illustrate here is that in the 15-16 fiscal year, which is the last year that we had Blue Cross Blue Shield, our loss ratio was just under 140%. To give a little bit of context to the loss ratio, that is the comparison of the premiums paid in versus the claims paid out. And you can see that on the chart. 100% would be equilibrium. Anything above 100% would reflect the fact that more claims are being paid than premiums, and the converse would be true if it was below 100. As you can see, as we've moved through each successive year since we made the switch to Aetna, we have been able to reduce that loss ratio. That is, to a great extent, credited at our staff members level, at the independent benefit advisors level with regards to all of the work that they have done in assisting us with this process. As of this presentation this evening, at the bottom of the chart, you can see a loss ratio of 36.6%. That is for the first 3 months, June 2020 through September 2020 of our current fiscal year. We had hoped to have a little bit more data for this presentation. It was not available. But as you can see, we are trending in a very positive direction. We are awaiting the bid to come from Aetna, but we are very optimistic that we are trending in the right direction relative to our premiums and what those premiums will look like for the upcoming fiscal year.
BD, may I mention some things about the loss ratio, just to give it perspective?
Absolutely. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. This is Paul Sider of Independent Benefit Advisors. And just wanted to point out that we are in unprecedented times. That very low loss ratio of 36.6% represents a time period, July through September 2020, where many people canceled elective procedures during the coronavirus emergency. Industry trends are that claims have rebounded significantly in November and December 2020, and these are resulting from rescheduled elective procedures. And as we approach the renewal effect of July 1st, 2021, we will closely monitor the loss ratio in any rebounding claims. We're expecting to see that 36.6% rise sharply. It's just a matter of how much higher it will go.
Thank you, Paul. At this point in time, are there any other questions with regards to the specifics of our Aetna health renewal? And the reason I ask that is if there is not, I'm going to switch to some of the other benefits that we'll be renewing on July 1st as well. All righty, thank you.
ED?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. It's Paul Sider from Independent Benefit Advisors. We might mention that we are not actively seeking bids from other carriers at this time. And there are a couple of reasons for that. We did go out to bid in July for July 2019 renewal. We received bids from prominent insurers in the marketplace, including Blue Cross, North Carolina League of Municipalities, United Healthcare, and also from a new insurance association called the NC HIP. Of all the bids received, Aetna's bid was the most competitive with a 4% rate decrease. And then last year for July 2020, the town did not go out to bid yet. Aetna issued a 3.5% rate decrease that we were able to negotiate to a 5% rate decrease. These two most recent renewals show that Aetna not only outperforms the competition for Garner's business, but also does right by Garner even when the town is not going out to bid. And they have demonstrated again and again over the 4 years their strong commitment to partnering with Garner for success. Just wanted to mention that in case council was wondering if we were going out to bid this year.
Great.
Okay, and thank you very much. Mr. Seckler, I probably failed in not, I sort of wanted to poll the council member just to make sure that each one felt comfortable and if they have a question to ask. So let me just do that very quickly. I'll start with
Sure.
Mr. Singleton. Anything for you, Ms. Singleton?
No, sir.
Okay, and Ms. Behringer? Ms. Behringer, I can't hear you. I think you have to unmute.
We're going to have to get Ms. Behringer a sticky note to put on her screen.
Yeah, I can see your lips moving, but I can't hear you. So while you're fixing that, I'll ask Mr. Matthews if he has a question.
No questions at time, sir.
Okay, and Mr. Dellinger?
No questions.
Thank you all. And Ms. Behringer, are you unmuted at this time?
Just a microphone. There you go. Touch that one. There you go.
Okay, you can. Okay.
Oh, that.
I think she was shaking her head. So you can go ahead, Mr. Seckler, at this time to the other areas, and we'll catch back
Okay,
up.
I'm back
with her.
on, yes. I
Okay.
have no questions.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. So what I want to do over the course of the next couple slides is just share with you some of the other benefits that will renew as of July 1st of this year as well. The first one is our dental administration. As all of you know, we're self-insured for our dental plan. However, we use Delta Dental to do all of our administrative work. As of right now, we have a 3-year rate guarantee through June 30th of 2022. And at this point in time, we have no plans to increase the rates coming forward. This is a similar conversation to the one that Mr. Seidler just had with us on the health benefits. And that is, as a result of COVID, we have seen a significant drop in the use of the dental plan We currently have a loss ratio of about 79%. We still feel that we are in a good position relative to the rates that we charge. However, we do believe as the COVID situation improves over time, that we will start to see that utilization go up again as people begin to use their dental services. So we are continuing to monitor that as well. Paul, I don't know if there's anything you want to add with regards to the dental specifically.
Oh, no, thank you, BD.
Okay, great, thank you. Moving on, we have our FSA administration, which we use in FiniSource. We also have a 3-year rate guarantee through June 30th of 22. So we don't anticipate any changes with regards to FSA administration. Our COBRA administration is also on a 3-year rate guarantee through September 30th of 2022. So we don't anticipate any changes to the programs or to the costing associated with those two programs. Some of the other benefits, we have our life insurance, our accidental death and dismemberment, and our short-term disability through Reliance Standard. That rate guarantee actually does expire on June 30th of this year, and we are currently working with Reliance Standard to obtain some new rates and to be able to consider those. And in a moment, you'll see the timeline with regards to when you will see our recommendations based on the information that we receive back from Reliance Standard. Medicare Part D, this is for our retirees. On January 1st of 2020, we moved from Blue Cross Blue Shield to an AARP United Healthcare program. We were able to avoid, by making this change, a 25% rate increase from Blue Cross Blue Shield, and we were able to secure a 20% rate reduction from AARP United Healthcare. Effective January 1st, 2021, we have continued with AARP United Healthcare. We did see a rate increase of about 11.4%, but the United Healthcare rates are just under 24% lower than what the Blue Cross Blue Shield rates would have been for 2021. So we're still seeing savings as a result of the change that we made in January of 2020, moving away from Blue Cross Blue Shield. As of this moment, we're still very happy with that decision that we made, and I believe our retirees are continuing to get very strong service through AARP and United Healthcare. Our retiree Medicare supplement is through Blue Cross Blue Shield. Each of the retirees has their own individual policy. Those will renew on June 1st, and independent benefit advisors Paul and John are working on those individual policies, and we believe that we should have those available for review in late March. So what does this all mean in terms of next steps? Obviously, I mentioned at the top of our presentation that we have been working for many months, really since probably September, on this renewal process. We are awaiting the actual renewal bid from Aetna. We believe that we will probably have that in late February, early March. And so our plan is the recommendations that we will make with regards to all of our benefits offerings will be presented to you, Council, at the work session on March 30th, 2021. Based on those conversations, if you so choose to approve our recommendations, then those would be on the consent agenda on the April 5th, 2021 council meeting. We would then begin our communications process for our open enrollment, which would begin on May 3rd and run through May 21st. That would give all of our staff members the opportunity to make any changes that they wish to make to their health care, to any of the other benefits offerings without any qualifying event. And then all of those changes would be input into our systems. and all of those new benefits elections that were made during open enrollment would become effective on July 1st, 2021. So that is kind of the timeline with regards to next steps. Obviously, we've still got some work to do between now and the council work session on March 30th, but we feel very confident that we will have all the information that we need. We will be able to make all of the decisions and recommendations and present those to you on that evening of March 30th. With that, I will stop for a moment and see if either Paul or John has any additional information that they would like to impart at this point in time.
Oh, no, thank you, BD. You covered it.
Okay, great.
Hey,
So what I'd like
BD, you did a great job. I can find you another career once you leave the HR department.
Thank you, John, very much. I appreciate that. What I would like to share, Mr. Mayor and members of council, before I go to open questions, is obviously, as you know, this is not an individual effort. This is truly a team effort. As I mentioned earlier in the slides, our staff members have been working very hard to help us to manage our healthcare costs. The two gentlemen on the call with me, John Gazarowski and Paul Sidor, have been invaluable in terms of providing support to me, in terms of providing support to this organization to help us. We recognize and we realize that our healthcare costs are very expensive. And through their efforts, through the collective efforts of everyone involved, we have been doing everything we can to try and provide the highest quality benefits offerings, healthcare and otherwise, and doing it at what we believe to be the best rates that we can. So I just wanted to take a moment and make those comments, thank John and Paul for all of their efforts, and thank everyone on this call for all of your support and efforts. And at this point in time, I would be happy to entertain any questions that anyone may have.
So thank you, Mr. Sheckler, and also for Paul and John. I believe, were they both with us at this time last year? I think
They sure were.
Okay. So thank you, gentlemen, for the good work you do. BD, this may be an unfair question. I didn't tell you in advance I would ask this, but and then I'm going to turn to council members. But it's sort of implied. But in the process that you go through in doing these things, I assume there's some way you receive feedback from the staff in general, either through department heads or others. Could you comment on that just briefly? I'm supposing that all of our staff are essentially pleased. Nobody wants to see the rates go up, obviously, but are essentially pleased with the program that we have in place now.
Yes. So we don't, as of right now, I don't have a formal mechanism where I reach out and ask for feedback on a regular basis. But certainly I welcome that feedback. I get that feedback formally and informally from our staff members. Certainly the feedback that I get most often is that specifically when it comes to our family coverage, the premiums are very high. And so we are working and continue to work to try and do everything we can to get those costs down. One of the ways that we're looking at potentially doing that this year is adding that third option, which would have a much lower monthly premium. But if the services were utilized, it would have much higher out-of-pocket maximums, co-pays, and deductibles. So I am very aware, as are Paul and John, that we need to do even better than we have been doing on those rates. And we're doing everything we can to push and pull levers to try and provide the best healthcare coverage at the most reasonable costs.
Good, and thank you for that statement. And certainly our staff members, they deserve that, and I appreciate
Yes,
the work you do each year. So I'm going to, at this time, recognize council members for any particular questions they may have otherwise. And by the way, I think we have a better view of you now than we did a little earlier. I could see half of you, sort of, but anyway, we can see all of you now. How's that? I'll start with Mr. Dellinger. Any questions, comments, sir?
Just a couple of comments and question. Sounds like we're going through 2 cycles at this point without soliciting any other bids. I hope we plan next year to solicit more bids. I'd hate for us to get in the habit of not, and then not having an option on the table. You always got to keep companies honest when it comes to their rates and their relationships, and keep it competitive. They'll do their best to keep it competitive. So I don't want us to get in the habit of not doing that over several years. To the mayor's question, is a really great question, and the answer is really interesting too, because I think this goes back to my other question. I think if we're getting feedback that the family premiums are very high, and we're growing staff over the next years, we're just growing staff, you're going to have younger staff with larger families. That makes it a larger burden for them. So I think we need to keep an eye on that next time we're looking at plans, to make sure that those family plans are competitive, or more as competitive as possible.
Yes,
so that those are my 2 comments.
Great, thank you. Yes, duly noted, and we will continue to do all we can to keep those costs as low as possible.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dellinger. Mr. Matthews, any questions, comments?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor, and I certainly echo Mr. Dillinger's comments there. Especially on the family side of it, that's a big issue. And with the growth we got going, and potentially consolidating even possibly another department later on, that's always been a very big issue. And seeking out and seeing where everybody else stands on these things, I think is very important, because we need to get the best rate possible, because these are trying times, and so many of our employees, the family plan is just almost beyond reach for them on their salary. And so I think competition is very, very important. And as much as we can reach out with reputable companies, let me preface that can give us some, I used the term bids or proposals to what we got. This gives us a good comparison, and that's just good business, regardless, to whom we're dealing with. In this case, it happens to be insurance, and I'm sure these gentlemen are very nice gentlemen and doing the best they got. But as we move forward, I think we need to bring as many to the table as we can, just to make sure that we're doing right by our employees as well as the people of Garner. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews. I'll go to Ms. Behringer for any questions or comments.
Yes, I'd just like to add that this past year I had a couple of instances where I needed additional explanations and follow-up and so forth, and talked with Paul and the people with Aetna and got very clear guidance. I didn't leave more confused than I came, and I really did appreciate that, particularly working with Paul. Had some questions that just kept going around in circles, and he helped me to put it to rest and move on. So I appreciate that professionalism.
Okay, and Mr. Singleton?
Yes, BD, do you know currently, I know that the number that are on the family plan is not a large number. Do you know what that number is by chance?
I don't have that number, Mr. Singleton, off the top of my head. I can get it for you as soon as this presentation concludes. I want to say that it's 15-ish.
It's not very many.
It's not many.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can tell the other council members I'm on the family plan, and it is expensive. I've mentioned this to BD in the past, and they did come back with the options of what plan you take, the higher deductible, and now they're coming up with a third option. And in some cases, that may fit some people well. It is a lot to pay. I mean, it takes what we were paid as a council member, and then also I pay a supplement every month. So it's $17,000 to $18,000 out of pocket just for that, plus deductible. So having my wife's surgery each of the last 2 years, the deductible was a lot. You're into $23,000, $24,000, $25,000 out of pocket. So it's a lot of money if you have to use it. So I agree. And when I mentioned before, if you have people who are, in some of our departments and can't afford to have that, a great portion of their salary. So I'll second what everyone has said in regards to the family plan, but it's difficult to find. There's no magic pill out there that's just going to drop these costs by 30 or 40 or 50% because you're insuring several people in a family and it costs a lot of money. But anyway, if you'll get us those breakdowns, BD, I know you've had them in the past, the employee and the spouse, the employee and the child and the family, and just email them. There's no hurry. It's just good information to have on hand.
Yep, Mr. Singleton, I'll do that, and I'll get that for all of the different tier groups out to each council member.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, council members, and I'm sure Mr. Seckler has noted the comments made, and but again, I want to thank him and Paul and John for pulling this together and giving us this year's update and areas where we can improve, we should, and hopefully I'm sure you'll continue to do all you can to keep the costs down as much as possible.
Yes,
so, okay. I think all council members had a chance to ask questions. So unless there's something else from you, Mr. Seckler, I'm going to move on to the next item on the agenda.
No, I am good. Thank you all very much for your time and your attention.
Yes,
Okay, thank you, sir. All right. Item number 2 on our agenda is a presentation by our planning director, Mr. Jeff Triesenberg, the 2020 comprehensive plan update and the Garner Forward comprehensive plan. So, Jeff, I see you there on the screen. Are you prepared and ready, sir?
I believe so. Just need to get the screen shared.
Okay.
And I believe, hopefully you can see that now.
Yes, sir. I can.
Okay, wonderful. Good evening, Mr. Mayor again,
Good evening.
members of the council. Good to be before you here tonight with the second annual progress report for the Garner Forward comprehensive plans. Kept the format very similar to last year, so hopefully this will be familiar to y'all. And I do like to just review the main plan themes and goals, etc. I think that kind of helps us keep everything at the forefront of our minds. So the plan was divided into 5 themes. Those themes include maintaining and keeping our character, a discussion about goals and objectives for housing and living spaces, as well as commercial and working places, recreation opportunities, and transportation projects that help to keep us moving. So that first one, maintaining and keeping our character, the vision statement for this was that building on and conserving the existing character will help the town attract quality development with favorable design qualities and amenities. So the focus there is that development can also build infrastructure, which then helps to ensure long-term financial viability in a virtuous circle of sustainable improvements. So when we have development activity, that leads to more income and revenue, which can then be invested into the community, which in turn leads you back to more development activity. And I think we certainly have witnessed that that virtuous circle is in full speed these last few years. The guiding principles for this are that we need to look at balancing our costs with our revenues, influence the design to the degree we can to keep with our character and improve the community's value, look to create a healthy brand for Garner, partner with civic and other organizations, both public and private, and including recommendations where we can that help address school performance. So in terms of maintaining and keeping our character, the first recommendation in the plan was to establish a regular evaluation among peers. And what I've done throughout the presentation is to kind of gray out the items that appeared in last year's presentation and focusing the updates in the darker text in our progress report. So we have identified a tool within our the ARP Livable Communities program. This had been identified due to staffing, which again got delayed a little bit this past year, although we're now up to full staff in our planning services section as of October. We'll be looking to make some real progress on some of these things in the coming year. So this is one of those. It's been specifically assigned now to the planning services manager and the planning technician within that section as performance goals for the upcoming year. So we definitely intend to have an initial look at how we rank among our peers on this for 2021. The second recommendation for maintaining and keeping character was to create a support network for public schools. Early on, we identified that this was going to need a dedicated staff person to organize such a network and be able to devote the time necessary. The whole school system, local government relationship is a very complex one as it is. So as of today, I am not aware that any lead department has been identified. However, economic development and police, as we noted last year, do already have some partnerships established. So in this past year, with the hiring of our newest senior planner for transportation, she has been looking at doing some coordinating activities with the police department with their PAL program. They have done an annual bike rodeo that would include the PAL kids as well as elementary and middle school students in Garner. Additionally, the planner is also looking to leverage some resources at the UNC Highway Safety Research Center to develop a strategy that would help us promote existing safe routes to school programs initiatives in the town. So that's a very loosely organized program, but where it has been able to be implemented, it's been pretty effective and positively received by the local schools. So we continue to try to find local schools within Garner to partner with on that. In terms of living spaces, the vision statement here is that housing for Garner citizens should continue to adapt to changing market influences and should specifically focus on the location, the quantity, and the design quality to drive how Garner will look in the future. So it's a little bit of a trick that we have to try to preserve tradition while embracing change at the same time in order to create a thriving community. So our guiding principles here are to continue to attract young and old populations, so diversify the age groups, using design and location to create good multifamily places, refocusing a lot of our redevelopment efforts on our centers, which include downtown Garner and North Garner, and to the degree that we can, try to stay ahead of a surge in redevelopment. So the first recommendation here is to improve design outcomes with a form-based code. And you're going to see this particular update several times throughout the presentation. You'll remember a theme from last year was that we were just about ready to sign the papers for our contract with Stewart to help us rewrite the UDO. Of course, that was enacted and we're well into that process now. So you'll see that in these updates, we had the recommendation to incorporate into the project. That contract is signed. We've appointed a steering committee, and the steering committee members are, in many cases, have already discussed, and in some other cases will be discussing some of these items. So specifically related to form-based regulations, the committee has actively discussed some changes to design regulations for both residential and non-residential development. And I would say that some of that discussion continues, and we'll be revisiting it periodically, is that there are certain statutory limitations for regulating design elements related to single-family and two-family residential buildings. And as you know, that's often a kind of a give and take discussion with developers who are doing single family subdivisions, because it's one of those cases where we cannot require things, but we can certainly encourage and support them offering up conditions that help to improve the quality and design of the subdivision. Second recommendation was to establish community forums. Of course, with COVID-19, that has become a little more difficult to do those in person. So we have not yet done any participation really in pop-up town halls, which I had hoped we would be able to do one or two of this past year. But one of the things that did come about from this is that the pandemic did bring about an immediate need to go ahead and get planning commission meetings broadcast. So we are now doing that, and I do believe that has been a good means of getting development-related information out to the public. A third recommendation within that category is to promote multifamily housing in select areas. So we did have a couple of multifamily projects that were approved in 2020. Those included the Waterfield Ridge Apartments on South Greenfield Parkway and the Elevate at White Oak Apartments on Salt Hill Drive. Those are both around the White Oak Shopping Center area and the employment centers in Greenfield. Other projects that have come about that are in initial planning, we have the 2 projects, apartments out at McCullers Crossroads, both at the 401 Assemblage and Rand Village. And we also have 2 additional ones in the vicinity of White Oak Shopping Center. The UDO Steering Committee, again, has looked at some of this. We've looked at restructuring our multifamily zoning districts, and we'll be introducing design and form-based regulations that will address compatibility, improve compatibility between these higher density residential communities and the lower density subdivisions that may exist around the periphery. A fourth recommendation is to preserve and protect Garner's existing housing stock. So in terms of this, we have staff within the planning services section that continue to serve as a liaison to what is now called the Wake County Housing Affordability and Community Revitalization Consortium. This is the group that administers HUD funds in the Wake County area, and of which we are a member. Wake County continues to emphasize a housing rehabilitation program that they run with those funds and is available to folks in Garner. They continue to emphasize this program because Wake County does possess a lot of apartments and houses that were built before 1980, a small number built before 1950. And so along with that aging housing stock comes the need for rehabilitation, and some folks cannot always afford to keep their housing up to code. So substandard housing lacks plumbing or heating and is in need of rehab to keep residents safe and healthy. And it also may include lead-based paint, which does remain a hazard potentially for housing that was built before 1988. The UDO Steering Committee is discussing potential impacts of infill development on existing neighborhoods and also evaluating whether or not we include any tools such as neighborhood conservation zoning overlays or other means of accommodating limited infill that would discourage tearing down and rebuilding, but improving and bettering. Finally, minimum housing code enforcement is a program that is run through our inspections department. A quick database search of the time period of the last year and a quarter revealed 36 cases in which minimum housing has been the primary cause of the call and complaint. And so those are cases that are where we are actually working with the homeowner or the landlord in those cases to get those houses brought up to code. And of course, that circles back to potentially the Wake County programs that help with financing the rehab. A final recommendation regards the provision of affordable housing. So we continue to be involved in regional meetings. Again, the consortium here in Wake County has taken this up more directly in the past year or two. The consortium is encouraging local public agencies to offer excess property for the development of affordable homes before they dispose of it via other means. So in some cases, even the school system may have some excess property that they don't have another use for. So those other public agencies are asked to contact the consortium first to see if there's a way that that land could be used for affordable housing units. Here in Garner, Habitat for Humanity is very active. Currently, we are in the process of reviewing the development of subdivisions for Habitat. It includes 100 acres off of Creech Road. So that's a fairly large neighborhood that is being planned up in that area. They also have some smaller tracts around town, including one on Weston Road, and also the Johnson Street subdivision, which is actually in construction now. One of the other programs that's available that we continue to work with folks on are those run through the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency. They offer tax credits to developers to help keep rents at market rate for their pocketbook, but at a reduced rate for the actual renter. So we've had 2 known inquiries in 2020 about the program and potentially bringing a project to Garner. The last one that you would be familiar with would be the Pine Winds project over there near Garner Station and Greenbrier subdivision. The third area is for working places. Again, the vision statement here is that commercial development should be a reflection of what we in the community of Garner need to have in closer proximity to us, not just necessarily what the marketplace wants today. So we have to work at recognizing changing trends in retail, workplace flexibility, and how work, home, and fun can all be integrated together. Certainly that has, I think, been more on the forefront of everybody's minds here with COVID-19, requiring many of us to work differently, including making presentations such as we are doing tonight. The guiding principles here are that we work to attract unique commercial establishments. We look to align our development code with the desired outcomes that we would like, supporting an anticipated increase in office needs. That was probably a little more emphasized a couple years ago. I think folks are looking a little more closely at that today. But in talking with economic development, our folks there, they still see an increasing demand for that in the Garner area, as well as taking advantage of work in place trends and understanding our utility demands associated with these developments. So one of the first recommendations in the plan was to create a co-working space. Last year, the downtown development manager and planning staff were in discussions with someone who was looking at a location potentially off of Rand Mill Road. That developer did complete their due diligence, but the project was not brought forward at this time for that location. But the downtown development manager does continue to promote the Gearworks project in space on Main Street. Of course, for the last couple of years, it's been very fortunate that one tenant has leased that entire space. They've grown from just 5 employees to more than 10. They're looking to get relocated out of Gearworks into a more permanent location, but with COVID, those plans are currently on hold to allow everybody a little bit more time. And so marketing for new tenants is also currently on hold until some of those plans settle out. But certainly that's been a successful so far space that temporarily at least gets at some co-working type efforts. Another recommendation was to establish a cooking studio or farmer's market. Again, this is more of an economic development-led project. The downtown has had pop-up markets in the past. They were suspended just prior to COVID due to declining attendance and lack of volunteers, as we know. But there have been some private efforts that have stepped in the meantime. And as you know, you've seen this project come before you in the past. The town is working with a local citizen in the Auburn community regarding a seasonal market there at Auburn, Knightdale, and East Garner Roads. And so potentially private efforts like this could turn into something more permanent going forward. And so we'll continue to look at opportunities there. Developing the north. This has been a big objective of the towns since the time of the North Garner plan years ago. We have had success in terms of single-family homes and townhome projects beginning to be realized in this part of town. So far, those have included the avenues at White Oak and Vandora West. The Creech Road subdivision is the Habitat community. Planning continues there. Tryon Point is one that we looked at in the past year, and they continue to move forward. And then we also had the Ashton Forest subdivision, which has reached its, for the lack of a better word, dormancy period. They are approaching their 2 years without having any renewed seeking of permits to move that project forward. And last I had heard, they are actually looking at potentially selling that project to someone else to take a different look at what might be able to be done on that property. Of course, we continue to work on the pad, and the Senior Planner for Transportation continues to keep their eye on the bridge replacement projects along US 70 at both Benson and Vandora Springs. Of course, those have been delayed due to funding issues. But in the past year, we've also seen some growth in non-residential projects, and those have included the East Wake Innovation Park, the Jones Sausage Commerce Park, and the Thompson Business Park on West Garner Road. So those all continue to move forward, although I would say it's probably in a little bit more of a measured, careful approach. And I just lost control. Give me just a moment. Okay. All right. Can you still see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we're at working place 3.
Yeah.
And develop the north recommendation.
Alrighty. Yeah, all of a sudden my controls went away and I was having trouble forwarding the presentation. I apologize about that. And then for working places, we also have recommendations to revisit and revise parking. That, as you know, has been a discussion particularly around apartments as of late. So this is one of those that was incorporated into the UDO rewrite. Again, that project is underway. We have the steering committee working with the contractor. And Stewart is currently working on Article 7, which does include the town's parking requirements. So that is expected to be coming to steering committee this spring, with some follow-up in the late spring and summer.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Let me rudely interrupt you just for a minute.
That's quite all right.
I know there are 5 of these, and you've covered 3 of them. I'm wondering, a lot of material that you've covered. Am I echoing with other people? I hear an echo there.
Yes.
So I was going to ask council if before you continue on, if anybody at this point would like to pause and ask a question on some of the stuff you've covered, or you might prefer to go through the entire presentation before questions, but sometimes when there's a considerable amount of material, I find it helpful maybe to stop somewhere in between and see if anybody has questions on anything that you've covered thus far, and they may not. Council, is there anybody out there who would have a question for the 3 items Jeff has covered up until now? And then we'll certainly get to the last 2.
Mr. Mayor, I have a quick question. Where exactly is the Habitat project on Creech Road located?
If you're familiar with the Gatewood subdivision.
Yes.
Okay. So if you're traveling north on Creech Road, the entrance to that the proposed subdivision will be just past Gatewood.
Okay.
A fairly narrow entrance that widens out into a good 100 acres kind of behind the Gatewood subdivision.
Yeah, so I know where it is.
Yep.
Okay, that's good. I'm glad to hear that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, any other council member have a question before Jeff moves on?
Just
Go ahead,
go ahead,
Phil.
Mr. Singh.
No, sir, go ahead.
I'm just going to say that obviously we're meeting the new norm with the growth in Wake County, and that's evident by things like we did over across from Garner Baseball with new types of housing going in there, which is making maximum use of properties, and the desires of people moving into Garner, especially the business people. A lot of them are working from home, and I think we're doing right by starting to look at the stuff now, and we really need to move forward pretty quick on a lot of it, because a lot of the older developments, that's kind of a good indicator that they don't necessarily want to refurbish some of these houses, because it costs more to refurbish some of them than to build something new, or something like some of the new projects we got coming in. So I think we need to continue to look at that extremely close, and because with real estate values in Wake County, not only in Garner but in Wake County, developers and homeowners, they're trying to get as much house as they can, as for the smaller amount they can, but land values, nobody wants the big lots anymore. They want smaller lots, and the convenience and amenities like White Oak or some of the shopping centers. McCullough's is a very good example of that down in that area. What used to be farmland, now everybody's looking to get in those smaller type lots or into the condos. So, we are facing a new norm here, and I think that people investing, and I see a lot of it in Greenbrier's place, where they're buying homes and upfitting them and reselling them. But some of these areas, that's probably going to be a tough sell, and we need to be alert to that those areas might change to something similar like we're doing up in Old Garner, which I think is a wonderful thing. And it'll bring people into that area, those working in Raleigh as well as in Garner. So the changes we're making, I think, are going to be positive. We just need, like I said, be alert to it and be prepared to move forward, because, times are changing. It's just the nature of what we're having to deal with. And I just want to comment on that.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews. And I would note, while I've interrupted Mr. Triesenberg, Mr. Vance has joined us. Welcome, Mr. Vance. So I'll see if other council members, Jeff, on my screen, we've lost your presentation page or whatever, but
Yeah.
you can refine that. Yeah, okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see, I've already recognized Matthews and Behringer. Mr. Dellinger or Mr. Singleton, at this point, either one of you have a question that you'd like to get answered now, or we'll move on?
I have a couple, yes.
Okay.
I will follow up with what Mr. Matthews said in regards to trying to keep neighborhood character. There are pluses and minuses to that. One of the minuses is, if you try to keep a neighborhood looking like it looks, you wouldn't have the two homes at Center Street and Garner Road, which have been built, which are very attractive homes. Homes are torn down, and we've got to be open and open-minded. I know we drive through like Raleigh, and you see some different style designs blending in with older homes, and sometimes they look out of place. I mean, there's a home down here on Buffalo Road past our house, our entrance to our street, which is a more modern looking design. Mm-hmm. It looks a little different, but you know what? It looks good, and it has a very high property value. So we need to be open on that. Second, one of the biggest concerns I have, and we'll discuss this when we get to adoption of the UDO, is something that concerns me greatly as I see other towns, not just in Wake County, but other towns I travel through with my work, is bringing all development out to the street. Everything's out to the street, to 3, 4, 5 stories high. Everything's out to the street, and you like driving through a cave. I don't want that in Garner. That's too urban. If you can remain and try to keep your character, you can't look like every other town around you, or Raleigh and Garner will just blend together. Downtown Raleigh looks like that because that's a whole different animal, because it's downtown. You have 20, 30, 40 story buildings. That's a different animal. But I've seen some newer development in surrounding communities and in other towns. Everything's brought out to the street, and I don't like that. I don't want that. I don't want. If I'm gonna live like that, you can live anywhere around here. It all looks the same. That's not your character. That's looking at some design standard someone's come out with and said, this is the way you ought to design your building now. That's no, sorry, no offense to planners and engineers, but they also said cul-de-sacs were the way to go 50 years ago. Now they said they're bad. So I don't buy all that. So we really need to be careful as we proceed with the UDO and how we do some of these standards, because I don't want all our development jacked out to the street. And you have it on both sides of the street. And it's like going down a cave. I won't mention one town in particular, one here which is going a dramatic transformation. It's not in Wake County that I go through all the time. And it's like, really, do y'all realize what you're doing here? And so I hope as we move forward with the UDO discussion that our standards do not require everything to be built like that. I don't want that here. And again, if you want that here, you'll just Raleigh and Garner will just blend together, because they have a lot of that. And it's just preserving your character. Well, that's not your current character. So we need to be careful as we move forward with that.
Okay.
Soapbox, wasn't a question I was going to ask. Are we proceeding with that? I'll find that out when we talk about the UDO further along in that process. And that's something that really, really concerns me as we look at development standards.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Singleton, and we'll certainly have time for comments in the future going forward, I'm sure. I haven't asked Mr. Dellinger or Mr. Vance if either one of them have any questions at this time. Mr. Dellinger?
A few questions, but I'll piggyback on what Mr. Singleton said and Mr. Matthews on keeping character. And that comes down to, sometimes very simply, to preserving tree canopy and tree preservation. We've got to change that in our UDO. We have to make them preserve more. They're using it now to gobble up wetlands and say, oh, look, we've preserved all these trees. You can't build there anyway. And then there's certain areas they'll put over here. And it just, you want to preserve that character, you need to drive around Garner, see what you like. Soon you talk about that house that is built a little differently. But what does it have around it that makes it fit in? It's got trees. It's got a backyard. It's got tree canopy in the back. You got to drive around Garner, say what you love, see what you don't like, and make sure we're developing accordingly. The question was, what is Tryon Point? That one doesn't come to mind.
Tryon Point was a subdivision, again, up off of Creech Road, kind of up around the corner just a little bit further, where directly across from where Creech and Sanderford split.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a small church up there that they parceled off, and then they're building the subdivision behind that church. Yeah.
And my other question is related to housing affordability and how we seem to have pulled away at the staff level from engaging with the county directly or other organizations. And I know there's two parts to this question, or statement. One is, how are we going to benchmark and baseline what our current housing affordability is in Garner for homes and rentals, so that we can measure it going forward? Because even if we need data, we assume we have this housing affordability in Garner because we've always had it. But even if you assume that half the housing in Garner is affordable right now, we're going to grow by 50% over the next 7 years. That leaves you with a third. Well, out of that third, it's going to shrink down to about this much because of just the market pressures. And the next thing you know, we don't have anything that is affordable for teachers, for fire and police and all these and retirees. I think we need to really re-engage on the affordable housing issue and not take it for granted. It's going to slip away. And my other questions are kind of further down, related to small area plans and things like that. So I will pass the baton to Mr. Vance.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And we'll have further opportunity as he gets into the final portions of his presentation, I'm sure. So, Mr. Vance, did you have anything? And then we'll let him continue.
Well, yes, first of all, I'd like to say that apologize for being late. There was a typo that was on the agenda for the time, so I was going by that time and not the other time. And I agree with what has been said thus far, and I have no substantive comments to make at this time. So you can proceed on, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, sir. Might just remind all council members, it's probably good to unmute when you're not speaking, but stay on the screen if you will. And certainly when you're ready to speak, just activate your audio. So I believe, Jeff, we've interrupted you there, but are you ready to pick up with the last two points there now, sir?
Yeah, no, that's just that. That's just fine. That gives me an opportunity to take some notes. I think when we did this last year, I may have just plowed through, or it may have been a little easier to do it more casually because I was at the podium. So, no problem. Thank you for giving me a break.
Okay, yes. If you need another one, just raise your hand. Okay.
So yeah, that was about a good halfway point, anyhow. So let me resume my screen here.
If I apologize, but if I may ask Jeff, I just looked at my notes again on another page. If I ask him a quick question. Earlier,
Sure.
You said that one of our goals is to create a healthy brand. Create a healthy brand. One of our vision statements. What exactly does that entail? Because we talked about branding years ago and it just never went anywhere.
Right. So when we included that in the actual comp plan, we specifically did not define branding, just because we didn't want to necessarily lead everybody down the idea of past efforts that had specifically revolved around branding. So it really the use of it within the plan was just more in relation to some of the other terminology that you see in there, and it's just more just about being cognizant of the identity that you're creating for Garner when folks think about Garner. So it wasn't used as in the idea of doing a specific branding program or anything, but just to kind of help people keep in their minds that, when you are developing these things and addressing some of the other recommendations, you are, through the decisions you make, kind of affecting how people think of Garner in their minds.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, proceed, Jeff, if you will.
All right. And let's see here. I am not seeing the red box around my screen, so I'm guessing you may not see the presentation either.
I see the presentation.
Well, we just have the opening page of the report, I believe, on the screen, or at least that's what I do, the 2020 progress
Yeah.
report.
Yes.
There's a prompt at the bottom that says take control.
Okay, let me.
Oops.
Here we go. Yeah, they've made some changes in the software where when you choose what you're wanting to present, it gives you a history. And unfortunately, that causes more issues.
Okay,
So I think
we're now at item 4, yes.
Okay, wonderful. Okay. So the fourth area within the plan revolves around provision of recreation and opportunities for recreation, and that they do more for our community than just provide places to play. They signify your commitment to being and building a healthy community, increasing property values by having more green space, and connecting great places to great neighborhoods with scenic trails. So the guiding principles here are that we identify and invest in our outdoor spaces, that we look at connecting ourselves internally from neighborhoods to neighborhood with open space. We continue to add indoor recreational space as well as outdoor, so we don't forget about the indoor. Connecting us with the larger regional trail and greenway network systems in Wake County, and exploring public-private partnerships, including those with neighboring towns. So the first recommendation here was to be sure that we were securing open space and recreation areas in the southern parts of town. This was an area where most of our ETJ expansion had taken place, and so we wanted to be sure that we were keeping up with acquiring open space and recreation in these areas. Of course, we had already been in the process of talking about Meadowbrook, and of course that transaction has gone through and planning continues. We continue in our TRC to discuss parkland dedication, including greenway land dedication and construction. So in the last year, we have public greenway segments now that are slated for construction by private developers in our southern areas, and these include segments of greenway at the Grove at White Oak, which used to be the Aurora subdivision at the end of Ackerman Road. The Old Stage Townhomes, which just came to you maybe a month or two ago, as well as the Oak Manor subdivision, which used to be known as Bethel, which is down there off of New Bethel Road across from the high school. Trust me, it's hard to keep up with those names. They keep changing them after they get approved, when they get to the marketing folks. Another recommendation here is to develop a public arts program. Again, the plan noted that this would really require a dedicated staff person, but we continue to have a small group of us that continue to talk about public art, including the downtown development manager and now some folks over in Parks, Rec, and Cultural Resources. So they, in particular, have begun to work with the Downtown Garner Association to look at generating some proposals for what they would like to do in the coming years. So far, those include some discussions around possible sidewalk activities, using stencils, paint, things like that, chalk, community mural on the Garner Recreation Center's retaining wall, and updating pedestrian directional signage along the 2-mile loop there in the downtown area. Again, nothing concrete yet at this point, but they are beginning the discussion and batting around some ideas that may be able to be brought forward at some point. Another recommendation is to invest in the maintenance of current parks and recreation facilities and to increase programming. A lot of this was in the works and actually completed last year, so I grade most of this out. But it did include the restructuring of personnel over at Public Works with their new teams and additions of several positions, as well as hiring the recreation superintendent at Parks, Rec, and Cultural Resources for the indoor rec center. Another recommendation is to preserve, install, and maintain street trees. This is one that, again, we've identified as part of the UDO rewrite. We're just getting to that now as the trees and landscaping is part of Article 7 of this report. And so that includes the street tree requirements within the landscaping section. So we should be making more progress on that this spring. And as noted last year, some of the significant discussion points for this will be placement, species selection, maintenance responsibility. These are items that get introduced in a tricky area. It has to be sensitive to the other infrastructure that is being put in place as well. So we expect to have some pretty robust discussion on that. But in the meantime, we will continue to enforce the existing requirements that are in the UDO today. And then finally, we have the transportation portion about keeping us moving. The vision statement here is that the transportation system in Garner is crucial to more than just moving traffic. We have to be able to move people and products safely and efficiently. In places where we want to retain that sense of community, we need to make sure that we're providing opportunities for walking, biking, and public transportation. And so our guiding principles here are to increase knowledge of all the techniques that are available to us, using a full range of congestion management tools, identifying projects that have a good bang for the buck, increasing the role of transit, prioritizing and defending connectivity, creating streets that include bike and ped infrastructure, celebrating our many points of entry, and to manage 540 as an asset for our community. So one of the recommendations here was to strengthen access management. Most of what you see here that's UDO related is will be discussed as part of our rewrite of Article 8. As mentioned previously, we're currently in Article 7. So Article 8 will follow after Article 7, but there's a lot in Article 7, so it will be later this spring. And so we do look forward to getting to those discussions as we look at ways that we can better improve the access, particularly along Highways 70 and 401, which have existed for many, many, many years. And in some cases, at points along those corridors, it's pretty much kind of a free-for-all. Driveways everywhere. You never know exactly where people are going in and coming out. So any way that we can try to improve it along those corridors and keep it more controlled and structured on new corridors is what we'll be looking at. Second, we're looking to establish some kind of connectivity standard. We've had some of those discussions about connectivity over the last year in certain cases. It is not something that you want everywhere and in all cases. It does need to be done very carefully. But this is something, again, that will be addressed in Article 8, and I expect some good discussions about that as well. Another recommendation is to conduct small area plans. To date, we have not identified any specifically for budgeting purposes, and just for you to keep in mind that if we do, those will probably be in the nature of 80 to 100 grand to complete one of those, depending on the scale and complexity. There are some things I noted last year. We did do a very specific focused analysis of some traffic patterns in the Aversboro and Highway 50 corridors. So there are some things that we can do in-house, but those are going to be more limited in scope and very focused. Finally, adopting a complete street policy and complete street guidelines. Again, this will be discussed throughout our review of Article 8, as that includes all of our street network requirements and what kind of facilities need to be included within the town streets. So again, just to summarize, we'll finish up with just a couple of other items here. How it's influencing our daily work. A lot of that has not changed since last year. It's still the same. We continue to try to revamp our staff report templates for you as we pick up on things that y'all are interested in or seem to have had enough of. So we do try to respond to that over time. We do continue to require these plans as background materials for consulting firms who are looking to do work for the town, as well as to private developers. And we continue to have and discuss these plans during our pre-development and pre-application meetings. Of course, most of those are taking place remotely, whereas they were still in person last year. But we've gotten pretty good at being able to pull those up as needed during these remote meetings. And we're still conducting about 4 of those meetings each and every week. It slowed down for a while in terms of how far we were scheduling those meetings out in advance, but our schedules continue to remain full. And finally here, looking at our opportunity sites, these were called out specifically in the plan, and so we do like to highlight the activity that's taken place in those focus areas. So focus area number 1 was Garner Station. This is an area where we expect redevelopment to coincide with the introduction of bus rapid transit. As you've heard updates from Gabby in the past, Go Raleigh had their kickoff early in 2020 on the southern corridor, and they continue to look at traffic analysis to try to get that corridor finalized, and they anticipate more detailed design work to begin in the early parts of 2021 coming up. And just so you are aware, the Federal Transit Administration did award $35 million in transit funding to the city of Raleigh for the first corridor, which is along New Bern Avenue. So just in case you were wondering if any of this was actually going to happen, the first leg of it has received federal funding. So this is something that is expected to continue to move forward. The second focus area is our northeastern gateway around the Amazon facility. Of course, that's now complete. Other interested parties met with us in the past year. That included the Jones Sausage Commerce Park and the East Wake Innovation Park that I mentioned earlier. We continue to review those plans with special attention paid to the architecture, site layout, landscaping, pedestrian facilities, and the possibility of some welcome signage to Garner, as this is a gateway from Raleigh into town. And the transportation planning and engineering staff are now focused on completing the phase 1 widening project from Amazon to East Garner Road. So we continue to see, have seen quite a bit of movement in this focus area as well. Number 3 was over at Auburn Station, the old Auburn community. Go Triangle completed an exploratory study confirming that the planned commuter rail corridor is feasible. So that was a big milestone. So we are expecting the commuter rail to continue forward, and that the Auburn station associated with that project will remain. They've initiated a second study to identify infrastructure that's needed for that commuter rail to operate efficiently, so where there needs to be double tracking and various other improvements. We continue to participate in those meetings, and to date on the private development side, we've had several pre-development meetings for parcels in the area, including a whole range of potential uses from single family and townhomes to banks and commercial out parcels and apartments. The fourth focus area was Fifth Avenue. That's a very, very limited area in scope. So when we do have a discussion that comes up, it'll be a big discussion, but as of right now, nothing related to redevelopment there. And then finally, downtown, this is our location to promote our local flavor and flair, as Mari and I like to say. And this is also the possibility of a commuter rail stop. And so in the past year, we have seen the relocation of the historic depot and caboose. We do have a townhome redevelopment project under consideration. We've seen a residential to commercial conversion, and the expansion of Hudson's Hardware, and planning for some event space and brewing activities. So downtown continues to hum right along in terms of things happening. So unanticipated impacts and challenges, again, the same as last year. I would note that David did a quick scan of cases. We have had, I would say, I hate to use the word just, but in some ways I do think just 6 amendments is appropriate. We did, and I do want to echo this, just that this is something that we expected when we adopted this plan, because we went to a parcel by parcel designation, and it doesn't give you as much flexibility in interpreting the map. And it's hard to predict exactly how these development proposals are going to come to us on a parcel by parcel basis. So 6 amendments, and overall I would say that the kind of the end result of those amendments was pretty density neutral. There might have been a slight increase, but there were a couple that really resulted at least in a, what I would say, a downward density, or at least a variation in traffic impacts due to the land use going from a peak hour morning and afternoon commute time to more of an all-day type impact. So again, overall, I would say those amendments have been pretty neutral in terms of traffic impact as well as densities. And then in the Garner Transportation Plan, we did rework a couple of the goals that you see to make those a little more specific as we go forward. And again, the goals for 2021, there's 4 of them that we pretty much have carried over from last year, and you see those here. And then we have 4 that we kind of restructured or reassigned. And those 2 from the transportation plan are specifically that we complete the update of the sidewalk project list, which we have the list redone, and we're looking at doing some mapping associated with that to help us in our reprioritization exercise with you. So we are working to get that to you, and consolidating the roadway plan recommendations into a single map. Those are very 2 specific goals that we've identified. Then thirdly, turning this annual reporting over to the planning services team, getting it specifically just out of my hands and into more of a team setting, where we would also bring in our other partners from engineering, parks and rec, public works, and economic development to hopefully revamp this process for year number 3. And then to complete the draft of the UDO rewrite, and hopefully by the end of 2021 be engaged in the public adoption process. So those are the goals that we've identified for 2021, and that takes me to the conclusion of the presentation, and I'll be glad to turn it back over and see if there's more comments and questions.
Let me thank you, Mr. Triesenberg. A lot of material that you covered. And I want to commend you and the planning department for your continuing work. I know the UDO rewrite is well underway. Look forward to completion of that, obviously. But again, thanks for the work. And council members, as you have questions now, I would ask you to sort of keep them directed maybe to the latter portion of the presentation. We'll still have opportunities to go back over some of this at a future date, I'm sure. But with that being said, Jeff is still available, so I'll start with Phil on this one. Mr. Matthews, if you have any questions in regards to at least the latter part of the presentation.
A lot of information to digest, and I thought it was well presented, and we've got a lot to look at and try to make some hard decisions, and because it's, as I've said many times, it's all coming our way. We just need to be proactive and do everything we can to be prepared and not be reactive like some other communities are. So good presentation.
Okay. Mr. Vance, do you have anything?
No question.
Okay. Mr. Singleton? Mr. Singleton, we need you to unmute.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
Okay.
Hey, it's not just me.
Yeah, that's right. I'm filling out a Tupperware order. No.
Oh, please, take your time.
No, I have a lot of questions, Mr. Mayor, but I won't ask them at this time. We'll, as we get to the discussion point during the UDO about more specific items, I'll ask them, and I can stay here all night making comments. So I don't think that's appropriate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you. Ms. Behringer.
Yes, just one quick question. Jeff said we didn't have any small area plans now. I seem to remember that we did in the past, and I was just curious about that, if they're outdated or just not developed, or what situation was there.
So the one that I'm aware of is the old North Garner plan. And so most of that has been brought forward into subsequent plans. So we have continued to look at that. We consulted it when we did the new comprehensive plan, and I know they reviewed it as well when they did the Parks and Rec plan update. So I feel like most of that stuff has either if it was found to still be relevant, was carried forward into new documents. But then I'm sure there were pieces that the thinking changed or a goal was accomplished differently. So it's still around, but it's not a plan anymore that we actively look to unless we're going back for kind of some historical background.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and Mr. Dellinger?
Just a few questions and points. It was mentioned you looking at 540 as an asset, and I think we're slowly missing the boat on that. And I think that kind of goes in concert with Ms. Behringer's statement on these small area plans, because it seems like some of those exit points off of 540 would be ideal for that sort of attention to planning. And so I guess, again, kind of going with what Ms. Behringer said, are there places in Garner where that approach could be used that we need to really look at? And if I handed you $200,000 to do a couple of small area plans, where are the places that we could utilize that approach?
Yeah. I would say the area around Rock Quarry is that one would be difficult because part of it's in Raleigh's jurisdiction. And we also see that there's a lot of private activity that's kind of forcing us to think about that on the fly now. The two that I think would benefit more in terms of, say, long-term 3 to 5 years down the road would probably be the interchanges at both 50 and at Old Stage, which we did talk about those with our economic development team members in terms of coming up with some of the land use recommendations within the plan, but that's about as far as we got. But those could probably stand to have and would benefit from additional study.
I think we need to at least identify some of those places, because I think there was one development, I can't remember where it was, it's kind of southeast, was kind of nestled where 540 was going to come through, and we approved some vanilla subdivision, whereas there's a good opportunity for future commercial or mixed use right off of 540. So I think if we can look at those again and see if there are places where we could really, because Fuquay is going to grow down in that direction, and we want to make sure, we're matching what they're doing, especially with the traffic prioritization. We want to get our foot in the door early on that. So my other is actually related to what you said about this celebrating points of entry. And so my question is actually about what is sort of the discussion around that entrance, that Calabar, Jones Sausage Road. I think, if council members would drive up Jones Sausage, go up to Rock, up across 40, and then turn around and come back, what you'll notice is that swath of trees on that corner, you can see it from half a mile away. And it really says a lot. And so I guess my question is, what are we looking at with the developer on that about doing some significant buffering on that corner there as you enter Garner?
Mm-hmm. So I would say that to date, most of the discussions that have taken place around the entries has revolved around, I would say, the welcome signs and the landscaping that's associated with that, which tends to be more ornamental and decorative and that nature. I would say we have not spent as much time on kind of the backdrop to those features. So if there's a desire to take a look at that more extensively, we definitely can. And so for right now, those discussions that we do have with developers when they do come in at one of these gateway locations is to try to work with them to hopefully absorb that $10,000 to $20,000 cost of doing the welcome sign and the associated ornamental landscaping. But if we want to take it further than that, that's something that I would definitely say we need to discuss further.
It might be worth that new software they used on Lake Drive that could show sort of the before and after. That might be an interesting place to really there could be a very dramatic gateway view and feel change at that point of entry. My other question is about the transportation plan, and I've brought it up before. This revamping and revisiting that transportation plan should be one of the top priorities of the town right now. The base plan is from 2010. The revision is from 2018, which means it's really 16 and 17. So that makes it 5 years old. And in that 5 years, we've approved 8,000 households in Garner. We only have not even quite 12,000 right now. And any notion that plan is up to date is out of date. And so I think we really need to look. We've had so many significant developments come in. We've had significant infrastructure needs, and we've got a VA clinic coming in. We've got these other big ticket things that have started to come in that sort of reprioritize where the flow of traffic is going to be. I really think we can talk about it more at the retreat. We need to really see what deep dive into that transportation plan moving forward. And 540 is accelerated, I think, at a faster clip than I think was anticipated too. And that has impacts as well. So those are my only comments. Thank you for that information. Good information.
Okay, thank you very much, Council. And Mr. Triesenberg, thank you for the updated report. This is an annual process. Am I correct on that?
That's correct.
So, okay, thank you. And as Mr. Dellinger said, perhaps some of these things we'll get a chance to touch on at the upcoming retreat, and maybe even flesh out some of these issues that have been raised here, I guess. But again, thank you for taking the time to put this together and to share it with us. So unless you have anything else, we'll give you the rest of the night off, I guess, and go to another topic.
Mr. Mayor, to add one comment. I am always leaving something out. I was real glad to see the commuter rail is still on the table, that it hasn't been just put on a shelf someplace. We need that badly, and it's good to see that it's still being held under consideration.
That's great.
Yeah, and just to that point, if you get a chance, I think Mr. Singleton alerted Mr. Mercer to that, but it's a good article today in terms of what happened over in Marshville as they were redoing a bridge over there in the town and the railroad obviously teamed up together, and they certainly mentioned commuter rail prominently between Raleigh and Durham, but certainly we are still very much in the discussion in terms of being on the southern end of the line here. So we want to make sure that our voice is still there, and every chance I get, I'm reminding folks of that. Okay, well, thanks again, Jeff, for that. And Council, if you're ready, we'll move to item 3 on the agenda at this time.
Sure.
And I will recognize Chris Johnson, our town engineer, who I believe has a presentation for us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Happy to bring this item to you that we've been working on for about a year now regarding the traffic calming program and updating the policy. If you can let me know when you can see the slide. Is that going up for everybody?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So go over a brief agenda for this item. We'll start by talking about the purpose of traffic calming. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with that, but just to kind of go through it, and especially for people that may be watching in from home. And then we'll talk about the policy, the schedule that we've had and the work that we've completed to date. And then we'll dive into the different types of traffic calming. Then we'll talk a little bit about the current policy, and then go into some of the changes that we're recommending based on staff's review of the policy and comparison with other peer municipalities across both Wake County and the state, and then provide the final recommendations and next steps moving forward. So basically the purpose of traffic calming has several components. Obviously it is right in line with promoting a complete street concept to make sure that the road is safe and accessible for not only vehicular traffic, but also to pedestrians cyclists, transit, and residents that live in neighborhoods, many of which have streets that might serve cut-through traffic from other areas of town that do not live in that immediate area. Of course, reducing speeding is typically the primary reason for getting an application from a neighborhood. Look at to decrease traffic volumes and that cut-through traffic that sometimes may have alternative ways to get around a subdivision, but prefer to cut through simply because it's a little bit shorter distance, but may not obey speed limit signs when they're going through that neighborhood. We always try to make sure that we maintain emergency vehicle access, and we want to try to do traffic calming in a way that's creating more attractive streets as much to the extent as possible, and then also just increasing the quality of life by making it still safe for both pedestrians and cyclists that frequent these same corridors as vehicular traffic. So again, kind of just a summary of where we are. This effort started about 1 year ago when council directed staff to review the traffic calming policy, which was last revised around 2009. Staff spent the spring of last year going through the existing policy and reaching out to several municipalities in the region and to compare the policy and to come up with what we would consider basically an updated traffic calming policy concept. So after that effort completed at the end of the early summer, we brought a draft policy concept and presented that to the Public Works Committee, which they approved. And then from that point through the fall, staff worked to come up with a draft policy that reflected that concept and to just look at refreshing the original format that we had from 2009. We came to Public Works Committee a second time in December with that draft policy, presented it to Public Works Committee, and they ultimately approved that policy with a few minor changes, which brings us to council work session today, where we're presenting the revised traffic calming policy. And if council decides to move forward with this policy as presented tonight, then the objective would be to bring that back in February for adoption by town council in a regular day meeting or night meeting. All right, so types of traffic calming, there are several different types. Typically what we see as the lower cost tend to be more passive measures. They can be simply enforcement by Garner PD. The Garner also utilizes radar signs that you've seen from time to time where they put them in neighborhoods so that drivers can see that they may not be driving around the speed limit, and hopefully that change behavior. Typically that's kind of a temporary fix, but is less of a permanent fix. You also can do paint striping, whether it be through crosswalks, adding parking stalls to narrow the road width, as well as bike lanes. I'm sure you remember we did something similar to that along Lakeside Drive last year by adding bike lanes along a long stretch of Lakeside Drive. Then we get into what we consider more the tier 2 measures, which are physical measures. These typically are going to tend to be a little bit more in cost, whereas most of the tier 1 measures can probably be done by in-house staff. This begins to get more into the design and construction. This is sort of the go-to for many neighborhoods, is to install speed humps. The two pictures you have on the screen, the one on the left is sort of the outdated style of what Garner used back in the maybe 15, 20 years ago. That's a shot from Greenbrier. Unfortunately, those types of speed bumps have had some issues because, one, some vehicles can bypass them with their wheel tracks going in between, and then they also have some maintenance issues that Public Works has ran into. The one on the right, although it's a little bit more expensive, this is sort of your more modern style speed table. It's a little bit larger and longer width or longer length, but it's only a few inches, but these typically perform very well. They allow traffic to go over them at a relatively good speed, not like 20 to 25 miles an hour before it seriously causes problems. But it also it forces any vehicle to slow down. So that's the one we've seen. We have installed one or two of those as while we were doing resurfacing streets where in Greenbrier we replaced one last year, and we'll continue to do that on any that we have in the future. In addition to speed humps, you can also, the picture here shows a raised crosswalk, which was pretty much the same thing as a speed hump, except it happens to occur at a place where you might have a pedestrian crossing. So you add some type of high visibility crosswalk to it. And then you can also, in lieu of a raised speed hump, you can also add pedestrian refuges like this one over at NC State on Capability Drive. This provides sort of a vertical addition to the roadway, which narrows the lanes, which ultimately impacts driver behavior by decreasing the lane widths. It also has a secondary benefit that it provides a pedestrian refuge for pedestrians so that they can cross only one lane at a time and have a place to stop in the middle. And then after this, you start getting into what we're now calling Tier 3 measures, which are going to be higher cost than the Tier 1 and Tier 2 measures. And they start getting into higher impacts, which impact the cost. And that's when I say impacts, I guess there's two different impacts. There can be impacts to the street, and then there can also be higher impacts to the adjoining parcels if you're working on the sides of the street. So here we've got a couple shots from two projects that I worked on while I was over at Raleigh on Sandy Forks Road and Kaplan Drive, where we installed medians. Again, kind of similar to the pedestrian refuge. You're kind of narrowing the lane width, but you start getting into higher costs because you're having to install lengthy amounts of curb and gutter, concrete, vegetation, whether in signage and trees and things of that nature. So it starts to increase the cost. Other measures that you'll see are what we call either neck downs. Some people call them chokers or bulb outs. This is where you've the one on the left, you've got parking along one side of the street, and they basically bump the curb out as it approaches the intersection. That way, when you're coming through the intersection, it makes people naturally slow down because of the width of the street decreasing. Then you've got chicanes, which are a little bit less popular, but sometimes you see them on low volume streets. Basically provides a requirement for the driver to veer from one side to the other. So it becomes a little bit more uncomfortable than going straight down the street. And in some cases, they require this to be a yield condition. So only one car can pass in one direction. So that way, if you come up to a chicane and you've got another approaching vehicle, one of you has to slow down to almost a stop to let the other person come through first. And last but not least, we have raised intersections. These can vary dramatically in cost. This particular one happens to be over in Raleigh, which was done with a lot of permanent dyed concrete to provide crosswalk signatures. But in any case, a lot of times raised intersections, they start impacting the curb and gutter and any storm drainage that you have approaching the intersection. So once you start getting into situations where you're impacting underground infrastructure, that's when the costs typically go up very quickly. Some other Tier 3 measures. One we like to see, it really just depends on the situation you have. But many traffic circles are good measures that can be done if you have a road large enough to accommodate it. This is sort of what some may consider a mini roundabout. It's a little functions differently from a roundabout, but has a lot of similarities as well. But basically you're not touching any of the corners of the intersection, but you're able to have enough width in the street to accommodate either a vegetated or hardscaped island in the center that requires traffic to go one way in a counterclockwise motion. So you see the one on the right is a fully hardscaped version, and while the two on the others are vegetated or have signage in them. And a lot of this comes down to what the street width will support and what type of emergency vehicular access or truck traffic you have on any given street. So it depends case by case what kind of island or size you can install. And then we've also got more uncommon tier 3 measures would be what we call diagonal diverters or half street closures. Sometimes in the case of full street closures, but this is sort of a situation where you may have enough connectivity within a development that you're actually able to cut off vehicular access in some fashion to certain movements. If you actually go to this length, you can still provide pedestrian and perhaps cycler traffic through the area, but it is sort of a major change to vehicular patterns. And then this is sort of not anything that we're proposing at this time, but just sort of gives you an idea of some of the types of traffic calmings that are out there. Some of them are brand new. Some of them are quite big ideas, but there's also, I think, the one in the middle of the bottom of the screen is one I would be very hesitant to install, just because of I don't want people getting fear that there's a flood in the road or something like that. But certainly, there's a lot of ideas out there, and communities are looking at new ways to try to get driver attention and to change driver behavior in these problematic areas that you have for speeding. And just there are some measures, and this is just I'm saying this is based on studies that we've seen. There's still debate out here on this. A lot of people, their first thought is to just add a 4-way stop or speed warning signs. In many cases, these are not typically recommended for traffic calming. 4-way stops can cause a variety of other issues. First of all, the stop sign can simply be run pretty easily, and if they're put in the wrong spot, it can happen pretty often, which can cause even more of a danger. Reducing speed limits when obviously the street will usually the width of the street, the topography of the street, and how many what the traffic volume is at is typically going to determine what the speeds, the general normal average speeds are, regardless of what you post. So reducing a speed limit when it really should not be reduced typically won't address the overall speeds. Installing rumble strips, that's something that would impact both cycling traffic as well as pedestrians sometimes. In roundabouts, although they're a great tool in especially on collector and thoroughfare roads where you have safety issues, they are quite expensive. They have high impacts, especially for retrofit situations where you're dealing with a typical intersection that's already constructed. And so they typically are not the most practical alternative for traffic calming. All right, so that sort of just gives you an overview of what kind of tools are out there in the toolbox. I was going to quickly talk about our current policy, and I've tried to reduce this down, and you have the full draft policy in your backup packet. What I was going to talk about real quick was go over the current policy, and I've tried to reduce this down a little bit so not get too far into the weeds from what we went through with Public Works Committee, but sort of a higher level view. The street classification, we typically only install traffic calming on residential streets and residential local and residential collectors only. Anything that gets up into more of a 3-lane commercial type collector or above, we're not going to recommend traffic calming because simply it has too high of a traffic volume to make that a practical alternative. Traffic speeds, the primary criteria that we currently have is the 85th percentile speed must be greater or equal to 10 miles over the posted speed limit. That's another way of saying that at least 15% of the traffic is traveling more than 10 miles per hour over the speed limit. As far as traffic volumes, the locals, it must be greater than or equal to 800 vehicles a day, and on collectors, greater than or equal to 1,200 vehicles per day. And then we do have a clause in the current policy that says that even though these two criteria are the primary criteria that must be required, if there is excessive traffic crash history as determined by the Garner Police Department, that we also have the ability to install traffic calming on other areas. Going into once a application is submitted, if it's deemed eligible for the program, the current policy requires that the petitioner get support from the community. We outline what's called an impact area, which is, of course, all households within the street in question that's being requested for traffic calming, but will also extend to any side streets that are using this corridor for ingress and egress from their location. So if you've got several cul-de-sacs in a neighborhood that this is their main egress out, then that impact area would extend off the street and also tie into those adjoining areas. Once the impact area is selected, you're required to get 2/3 support from households within the impact area, and a household is considered one signature per household, and it must be an owner. We do not include tenants in the policy. It must be the property owners themselves. And then just checking on, make sure I didn't miss anything on this slide, but I think everything I've said covers that. So then that covers what we've got today. Now, from the peer study and going through what other municipalities are doing, what we found was the traffic calming treatments that we're using and that are in our current policy, they're all in line with our peer municipalities. So we're using a lot of the same treatments in our policy that are being used elsewhere. One of the differences we saw is that many of the newer policies that we saw that are being done, they're starting to move towards what's called the tiered system, and it's basically the same tiers that I showed you earlier, starting with tier 1 being your most inexpensive and easiest measures to install, moving upwards towards tier 3, which are your more costly and impactful measures. Speed and volume criteria that we had, we found that the speed and volume criteria were slightly higher than most other peers that we checked. And again, we looked at about 10 municipalities, most of the ones that we had programs in Wake County. We also looked at a few out in the Charlotte area and Greensboro, I think, or in Winston-Salem. So everywhere we could find across the state that had pretty strong policies, we found that we were slightly higher than the norm. So we're going to be recommending to reduce the speed and volume criteria to be more in line with those peer municipalities. And then the petition process itself also fell in line with peers. But what we found was that we would like to see if there is a way to expedite the petitions to sort of incentivize and motivate getting tier 1 and 2 measures in where we can. If we've got an HOA board that is approving the application and the recommendation by staff, we would like to see that be able to be somewhat fast-tracked and rather than having to go through the full petition process. It doesn't impact subdivisions that do not have HOA boards. They would have to do a petition just like the current process, but just a way to help get this process moving a little bit faster in areas where you've got a large majority wishing to have that done and it's eligible. So as far as recommendations, we're saying no changes to the traffic calming treatments offered in the program, but moving to this tiered system. Again, here's sort of a outline of the 3 tiers, moving from tier 1 to tier 3, low cost, mid cost, high cost. Most of the tier 1 measures can be done pretty quickly, can be done without a petition, and it can be usually done with in-house forces, whether it be Garner PD or Public Works putting in some striping or some added signage in some subdivisions that may not even have posted speed limit signs. We run into that. Then moving into tier 2 is sort of going to be your narrower local streets, two-way streets that are less than or equal to 35 foot in the street. Tier 1 measures are probably already in place, but they're not seeming to do the job to deter speeding. The Tier 2 measures have minimal impact to the outside of the pavement, since they're typically going to be either speed humps or crosswalks that are in, or pedestrian refuge that's just inside the pavement area. Then moving to the Tier 3 is your higher costs, where Tier 2 measures are either are not preferable, which is typically going to be on your wider streets that are greater than 35 feet. You've got probably on-street parking, higher traffic volumes, and it just gets to a point where you need to get away from the vertical type speed humps and move more into sort of the what I call the horizontal type changes, where you're either putting in the chokers or the bulb outs or the mini traffic circles or what have you. And of course, these are going to be higher impact outside of the pavement. It's going to be a higher cost, and it will likely have a higher chance of requiring either additional right-of-way or easements from adjoining property owners along the corridor. From project funding standpoint, we're not recommending any changes. The current program is 100% town funded. There was a variety of funding options across our peers. Most were also town funded. A few of them were doing some shared cost programs. This is certainly the most equitable solution for those neighborhoods that may not be able to share in the cost or have an established HOA to put money towards it. So we're not recommending any changes there. And then as far as the criteria, as I outlined earlier, we are recommending to reduce the criteria for both speed and volume. It's going to be a 2 mile per hour reduction on the speed limit. So it'll be greater than or equal to 8 miles per hour over the posted speed limit. And then the volume for local streets goes from 800 to 600, and from collectors down from 1,200 to 900, which is about a 25% reduction. The petition threshold, again, we're not recommending any changes. Our petition thresholds pretty much sat right in the midst of where everybody else was at. Most of the programs that had petitions were right between the 2/3 and 3/4 threshold. And then the petition requirement, since we're now moving to a tiered system, we're kind of outlining what we believe to be a good way to go about it, which is Tier 1, the lower cost measures, no petition would be required. Be able to fast track those types of installations where that may address the issue. Then move to Tier 2. In areas where you do not have an established HOA, a petition would be required, similar to what was done under the old policy. However, we did recommend a change with Tier 2. If you have an established HOA and the petition would be waived if an HOA board endorsed the traffic calming application when it came in, as well as approved the staff design as recommended. And then the last option of Tier 3 for the larger corridors that cannot have speed humps, petition would be required. So next steps, our plan was to receive any feedback, answer questions tonight, and then based on the feedback, if council is ready to move this forward, we were anticipating bringing a final policy to a February council meeting for adoption, and then be able to set an effective date to move that policy forward. And that concludes the presentation, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
By the way, I think the last slide you have there, it reminds me that I'm way behind being aware of the latest calming measures. So thank you very much. But we'll give staff an opportunity for questions and comments. And by the way, staff, I know we've been going at this, staff and council, we've been going at this for a while, so we'll take a recess after this. So Mr. Single, I'll start with you for questions. Of course, you and Mr. Vance are currently on the Public Works Committee. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And I understand you folks have probably signed off on this, but go ahead with any questions or comments you have, Mr. Johnson.
Well, again, I want to thank staff for refining and making changes, suggested recommendations and changes. We talked about these changes. In particular, was reducing the volume numbers, as Chris noted, 25%, and then the speed was reduced from 10 miles an hour to 8, so that's a 20% drop. And these traffic calming measures won't solve everything, but they are. It's expanded now, and I think we all realize that the humps that we have in place now, they're having some issues with Public Works making repairs, but those just are not effective. I drive through towns and see these. I got a store in Wilson right beside Barton College, and they have come in and put numerous raised sidewalks in that area for the safety of their students, but also it slows the traffic down. And I know, as Chris noted, there were some changes made, I believe, in Greenbrier when streets are repaved. And I know that they'd like to see those humps removed and something, the raised safety measures put in, as with the folks in Cloverdale on Meadowbrook and Cason. So I appreciate the work staff has done. I did mention that when you look at the policy itself in writing, Chris did a great job of condensing this, so it's understandable. I did mention to him it's kind of wordy, but it is very step-by-step. It explains what to do and how the process would be taken for a neighborhood to approach the town council and the staff about considering some type of traffic calming device. So I appreciate the thoroughness of which staff has gone through this.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Singleton. And Mr. Vance, I believe you were on that committee as well. I recognize you for questions, comments.
Oh, yes. Again, I would say thanks for all the hard work the staff put in, and our traffic calming devices definitely need help within the town. There are areas where you just can drive right between them. So to relook this policy at this time, I think is appropriate and befitting. And I will not repeat what Councilman Singleton has already said, but yes, Mr. Johnson did a good job of condensing the policy down so it's understandable and clear to the I guess the non-technical citizen, and easy to make a request for such of a device to be placed within the neighborhood, to go through that process. So a lot of hard work has gone into it. Appreciate the staff for that, and that's all I have.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dellinger. Questions, comments?
Yeah, thank you. It's good to see the changes that are there with the volumes and the speeds. And I noticed there is sort of the criteria around speed and volume and neighborhood support. I'm really in favor of adding some more funding to do this in neighborhoods. But I think we also need to include some prioritization criteria in there related to safety. And I think one of those is, and it popped into my mind vividly this past week, actually over the past several weeks. On Lakeside, we've got it, it's very wide, and then it narrows down as you're going towards Aversboro, and those bike lanes disappear, and it's very narrow, and there are cars parked on the road, and there's, I guess, a relatively new family that's moved in, and there's been a little girl and her friend on their bikes, and you kind of see them dart into the road and, try to come up the road. And what dawned on me is, and I'm thinking about Cloverdale and Greenbrier as well, is the lack of sidewalks needs to be incorporated as a priority condition for these neighborhoods, because the lack of sidewalks puts people in the road. And so if you end up in a situation where you have to choose between where to replace or where to add these measures, that lack of sidewalks should really be into consideration, because it's really helps create dangerous conditions. The other question I had was this, the fact that, and this ties into this non-HOA thing, so I'm not quite sure which one to put forward first, but I'll go with this one. It's mentioned that only property owners are able to do this and not tenants. And I'm curious about that, because tenants, especially as we move to a more multifamily, but tenants in apartments or even in neighborhoods, they're just as equally as affected by the dangers of the traffic. And they pay taxes, they pay property taxes on their car, they pay sales taxes. So I'm curious as to what the rationale is around excluding tenants from having the opportunity to participate in the petition process.
Yeah, basically the reasoning for that is first of all, when we're reaching out to or providing lists, property lists to the petitioner, we're typically relying on property owner data that we get out of tax IMAPs and so forth, that's just typically going to be your homeowners. We saw this a lot when I worked with the city of Raleigh as well, that when the more tenants were brought into the petition process, the more confusing it got, because some tenants can leave. I mean, certainly certain owners can leave as well, but typically the turnover rate of tenants in these type of neighborhoods can vary quite a bit, while the owner remains the same. And sometimes the petition process and the full project, from the time the initial petitioner comes in the door to the time you're petitioning the neighborhood and then moving into the final approval process, can last a year or two, just depending on how big the corridor is and how many owners you're dealing with. So that's sort of the rationale, is to try to keep it as simple as you can, certainly hoping that the owners that own those homes that have tenants are talking to their tenants and getting input before they cast their vote. But that's sort of the rationale.
I guess that, to me, it puts the non-HOA folks at a disadvantage compared to the HOA folks, because you have single-family homes that may have tenants, but you also have apartment complexes that have lots of tenants and that may be pedestrians or use roads. So that, and then you get into a non-HOA situation, or even an HOA situation where you have that really high 2/3 threshold. An HOA might not necessarily be representative of the entire neighborhood, and they can just agree if only half the people are involved and they agree, then that's that. But if you have a non-HOA, then you've got a situation where they have to put forth the extraordinary amount of work, and if there's a high number of tenants, they're actually reducing their opportunity to find eligible petitioners to help them petition. It puts an extra burden on the non-HOA folks to move through the process, because that threshold is really high, I think. I don't know. I think I like the changes. I'm just apprehensive, and I know people can move and move out and stuff, but to sort of disenfranchise people who are here, who are experiencing the same issues, gives me a little bit of pause. Just that's my 2 cents on that. And again, the threshold for the non-HOA seems kind of high compared to what an HOA, already being better organized, yet maybe not any more representative of the entire neighborhood. So I'll put that out there as my thoughts. But it's a good policy.
Yeah, let me get to a couple other people. Mr. Matthews, questions, comments?
Not this time. Everything's kind of been asked, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, and Ms. Behringer?
Yes, just a couple of things. I appreciate the hard work and the updates. That's good. Just an observation. There are other areas in town besides neighborhoods who need traffic calming devices or traffic calming situations. Case in point is Main Street. Cars fly down Main Street, and the Tier 1 measures work as long as they're there. But when that radar trailer is gone or the police car is gone, then the deterrent to flying down the road is also gone. So I'd just like to put that out there for thought, and maybe for some future work on solving those problems. Garner Road is another one. People turn onto Garner Road at Jones Sausage Road, and they fly all the way down to Highway 50. And so those are state maintained roads. I realize that they're not private neighborhoods, but they're very dangerous. And so I would like something looked at as far as how we can make that better. We put the radar trailer out there, and sometimes people pay attention to it. Most of the time they don't.
And one thing I would add to that comment, projects on Main Street and Garner Road would not be eligible under this particular program.
Right.
Traffic calming program is solely for, it's intended to be for residential streets that have driveways from individual residences. I think Main Street and Garner Road would probably be, Garner Road's obviously it's a major collector. So it handles more traffic. It's a DOT road, like you said. So the DOT typically would not allow that type of. They wouldn't allow speed humps. They may allow some other type of measure, but typically once you get up into DOT maintained street, it's going to be a hard ask to get certain things done with respect to traffic calming. But then Main Street, that would be something that it could certainly be done. It would just need to be more of a council initiated project rather than something that comes in through a petition from a neighborhood.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Sure.
Okay, and I want to thank you and the committee as well. Yes, go ahead.
A couple of things. One is we reviewed a proposal on improvements along Main Street there at the corridor at Grand Mill Road that would have an elevated sidewalk. It would have a speed table, whatever you want to call it, at that intersection. We talked about that at the last, that was presented to us 2 or 3 meetings ago, 2 or 3 months ago. And because we talked about the bulbs, which would be for stormwater. So that there's one planned on Main Street currently. Secondly, Mr. Dellinger's concerns, we have to realize that practically all of our multifamily are on state roads. And all the new ones coming in are getting sidewalks, and I agree with sidewalks with you, of course, are getting sidewalks. I mean, there are very few apartment projects in Garner. They're very, very small projects that are on state roads. And most of those were built with the sidewalks, were built with a standard where the standard was kind of transitioning. So I can see what he's saying, but you know, it's just like the recall for the governor in California. They're trying to get like 40% more signatures because they realize 40% of them won't be valid. I don't think staff needs to be chasing who the tenants are in an apartment complex. That's not, we don't need to be doing that. You talk to the property owners, the tenants can give input, but you know, signing a petition is just not going to work because you can't chase what's valid and what's not. But most of our projects, we have to realize most of those multifamily are on state roads. So as Mr. Johnson mentioned, we have very little to no impact on what we're going to be able to do other than to ask a reduction in the speed limit. It's the town streets I think we all have concern about. I mean, we did the striping on Lakeside. I don't know if that's taking much effect on the wide part in particular. But we just need to keep that in mind that these are for local town streets. This is not for Garner Road. This is not for Andor Springs Road. It's not for Timber Drive. There are things we can do to work with the state, but they're very limiting. Okay,
thank you, sir. And I'll make just a quick observation, Chris. It's a difficult process to come up with something that really will slow people down to the extent that many citizens would prefer to see. And so I know when I try to drive pretty much the speed limit, which I try to do on a fairly regular basis, particularly in town, you will soon collect people driving behind you who let you know by their distance to the rear of your vehicle, and sometimes the look on their face that they are highly agitated that one is not going faster. So but traffic calming is needed.
That's called intimidation.
Yeah, I guess it is, sure enough. But anyway, thank you for a good presentation. I guess we'll get some information back at the February meeting, and a lot of work and time has gone into this. And so, again, appreciate your good work on it. If anybody has another question, we'll let Chris go for the night, I guess, and move to the next item. But I was going to suggest that we maybe take a recess. Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, just one point I wanted to make to a point Mr. Dellinger asked about in terms of like sidewalk prioritization. We did put a clause in the policy that would allow council the discretion of choosing to have traffic calming measures where there are pedestrian traffic generators or other unique circumstances. So that was sort of put in there purposefully to let council address a specific situation that it was very hard for us to write specific criteria around. So that is there for council's discretion on unique situations like near and across from parks, near and across from schools, other pedestrian traffic generators. So that is in there. You can take a look at it when you're reviewing the policy again.
Yeah, I saw that, and I see it's good, but I also want to make sure at the staff level there's that prioritization of ability or thought process as well, so that not everything comes to council for, this kind of thing. So, but yeah, I saw that in there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, council. I'm going to suggest that Chris, you're through? Anything else you had? I assume not.
No, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, council, if we could take a recess at this time, and let's try to be back about 8:30. That's 7 or 8 minutes from now. So, if we'll do that, we'll still have several things to cover. So let's begin back at 8:30. For now, I'll declare a 7 or 8 minute recess. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're back live at this time. Excuse me, and so thank you for coming back timely. I declare that we're back now in regular session, and we will pick up on item number 4 of the agenda as we work our way through this process. And I will recognize Mr. Mike Franks, our budget manager, for a discussion on bond and CIP updates. So, Mr. Franks, you're up. So, Mr. Franks, I see the first page, I guess, of the presentation. I do not hear you and do not see you yet.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. The rest of the council, does he have
I
audio?
apologize for that.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm here tonight to give an overview on the CIP and bond summary. So the capital improvement plan, the bond, as everybody knows, we're having a bond referendum, or planning on having a bond referendum next November. We also, on an annual basis, update the capital improvement plan. So this is looking for council input on the capital improvement plan, but also hopefully starting to make some final decisions on the bond summary. So that's one of the major takeaways tonight, is to hopefully get some council feedback on the bond summary in terms of the allocations and the projects we have currently listed. We are getting closer to the May date of when we need to have final decisions made, and if we're going to have any changes, we would need to start to include those soon so staff can do the necessary work. So this is really staff's attempt to put together a formal recommended bond summary, and that's the plan unless council has direct impact or direct feedback otherwise. So the overview, again, review the CIP and bond process, provide staff update on the CIP bond recommendation, and I'll have questions throughout. Just as a reminder, staff in Davenport provided an update on the CIP debt affordability and the 5-year operating budget in November. At the meeting where Davenport provided a pretty in-depth overview on the overall integrated model that included operating, the debt affordability, and the CIP to show the overall financial picture of the town. Staff has continued since that time to review potential projects to refine cost estimates. We did put aside $200,000 in last year's budget, which we have still not utilized for one-time cost estimates, and we are continuing to look at different ways we can utilize that, but it has not been utilized at this point. Again, final decisions are on the bond referendum are required by May 2021, so we're getting close to that. And staff has added an additional 5 years to the CIP, which includes the future cost of anticipated bond projects. So we're not looking at additional projects that might appear in that 5 to 10 year window. We're really just trying to show the full the full cost. There were in particular some transportation projects that maybe were not incredibly realistic in terms of timeline, but we were trying to fit it within a 5-year window so that we could see the full cost in terms of what we would spend with the bond. So we've extended that out 5 years so that we could show what we would consider a more realistic timeline. That's what you have there. So here's the CIP summary. This is similar to what I've shown in the past. So you can see on the left-hand side, top left, you have the categories, parks, transportation being the two biggest, then general government, stormwater, capital renewal. And you also have various revenue sources. You can see the transfer from the general funds, current bond proceeds, that's bond proceeds that have not been spent yet from the last bond referendum, future bond proceeds, and this amount is currently the amount that Davenport said the town could fund without a tax increase. So that is assuming no tax increase, just using our current resources. Impact fees, in this case, that is fee in lieu of parklands. And I have tried to incorporate the fact that we have raised rates and think that is a realistic estimate and something that could be extended out into the future in terms of the $1 million allocation. But we also do have additional needs there potentially. PAL bill, which is received from the state and is used for resurfacing efforts. Fund balance, partner agency funding. In this case, in Wake EMS, in terms of matching funding for the fire station, and then also Campo lap dollars, or primarily Campo lap dollars. Other funding is motor vehicle fees, and then unknown funding source. That's highlighting the variance between the identified needs and the amount of funding we have not been able to find, and that would be kind of your delta. So here is the overview in terms of what we have, and this is a new view that we have not seen in the past, just trying to highlight funding that we're utilizing. So you can see parks up at the top, we have $20 million in bond funding, a total of $52 million, $28 million of which is unknown. Transportation, bond funding of $18 million, so about on par with parks. Other sources of almost $31 million, and then the $15 million that is unknown. General government, bond funding of $4.4 million, additional funding of about 1.8, and then unknown of 250. Stormwater, we have bond funding of 2.1, and then unknown of 1.25. And then capital renewal, no bond funding there, but we do have other sources of 4.9. And really what we're trying to show here is kind of the three different buckets. High level bond funding would obviously be part of the bonds. Other sources are sources that the staff feels are likely to occur. In some cases, particular Campo lap, it's not a guarantee, but they are more likely than not going to happen. And the unknown is we don't have the funding, we don't have a plan for it at this point, and we would have to come up with a different allocation or raise taxes in terms of the referendum to be able to meet those needs. So just high level overview, total requirements of over 131 million have been identified, with 44.6 million being unfunded. So that's that delta. Future bond proceeds are based on Davenport update November, again with no tax increase. And then on to the park summary. So this is, again, the high-level summary. You can see on the top left-hand side the three different categories. So parks is broken into facility development, park enhancements, and also greenways. So I will go through all three of those individually. So park facilities, this is the Meadowbrook-Jurgen project. We currently have identified funding of $36 million, which is very possible not going to be sufficient to fully develop both parks. It could be even more than that based on some of the latest estimates, but that's the figures we had included at this time. As you can see, we have future bond proceeds of $13.5 million funding that project, an additional $4 million in impact fees, fee in lieu of parkland, but unknown funding of $18.5 million, and that is a large number and could be even larger, as I mentioned, if we ended up fully developing both projects, as it looks like it might happen, but the total cost would go up even more above $36 million. Park enhancements, this would be park rehabilitation, so these are projects that have not yet been identified, but large-scale projects, for example, fixing or updating the boathouse, that would need to happen on a periodic basis, so larger than things that might end up in the perform list, which is just maintenance. So, but yeah, rehab, nothing new. So here you have $1.5 million of the 6 in future bond proceeds, but an unknown funding of $4.5 million to meet that $6 million target. And then we have greenways, or future greenways, total of $10 million with $5 million in future bond proceeds, and then $5 million in the unknown funding source. And then you can see here again the breakdown, the park CIP bond summary. So facility development, which is again Jurgen Meadowbrook and the big large scale parks. We have $13.5 million in bond funding. And then other sources of $4 million, unknown of 18.5. Park enhancements, 1.5 million in bond funding, unknown of 4.5, and greenways bond funding of $5 million and unknown of 5, for a total of $52 million. An additional summary, the bond referendum includes funding for the development of $13.5 million for Meadowbrook Jurgen, $1.5 million for park rehab, and $5 million for greenways. Additional requirements of $28 million are currently unfunded. And if we continued to have this as is, it would limit the town's ability to fully develop Meadowbrook Jurgen. It would impact the town's ability to fully fund greenways, and also would potentially impact rehabilitation. Transportation summary. Again, you have the 3 high-level categories. So street improvements, sidewalks, and then transit. I'll go through each one of those individually. So street improvements has a variety of different projects. Pavement preservation is just what it sounds like, maintaining streets. And we have a couple of projects that are still in the pipeline from the past. Then we also have the 3 or 4 major projects would be Ackerman Road Extension, Jones Sausage Road improvements, and that's based on the most recent numbers from staff, the Wilmington Road Extension, and Grove Mod Extension. For all of these, we've assumed the town would fully fund the initial cost, the $2.4 million in Ackerman, the $2.4 million for Wilmington, and that's the study money, basically the money that would be required to actually do the initial analysis. So the town would be fully funding that, and then a 60-40 split on the construction piece, with hopefully getting Campo LAP dollars. And you can see with this approach, we are able to fund a significant number of the projects. The one we do not have as funded is the Wilmington Road Extension. And the thought behind that was that would be something that potentially development could take could basically cover for us as time goes on. There's some other ones where that could be the possibility, and this, as I've mentioned in the past, is going to be a fluid situation. As Mr. Dellinger mentioned, the transportation network is changing rapidly. So as new developments come online, as developers potentially have new projects, we may have to review and change our priorities here. So we'd have to be pretty flexible in terms of taking advantage of different opportunities that might come along. But this is the current snapshot of what staff thinks would be realistic here. Sidewalks, we are continuing to go through the prioritization process of sidewalks. At this point, we have $6.25 million funded with future bond proceeds. This is again something that is a council and citizen priority, so we have this fully funded, and the prioritization process is ongoing. There's a couple of projects that I believe are still in the pipeline from last time that we could initially start with, and then we can continue to go with the prioritization process and fund those as time goes on. And then transit, we have the public transit infrastructure, and this is for the circulator loop. We do not have the ongoing cost accounted for at this point. This is the initial infrastructure cost associated with starting that, but there would be an operating piece as well. We just do not quite know what that figure would be, but that would be a recurring cost, where this would be the one-time cost associated with the infrastructure. So here again, you can see the transportation CIP bond summary. So street improvements, we have $11.8 million in bond funding. Again, that's funding for the bonds. Other sources, primarily Campo LAP, over $30 million, almost $31 million. And then the unknown here would be the Wilmington Road, which we think could be potentially picked up by development activity. Sidewalks is fully funded with bond dollars. And transit is an unknown funding source, and that's the $720 for infrastructure. So the bond referendum includes funding, again, $11.8 million to invest in large street improvement projects, $6.25 million for sidewalks. Additional requirements of $15.1 million are currently unfunded, although a large chunk of that is a road that we think might be constructed otherwise. And it could limit the town's ability to maximize available third-party funding for transportation projects. Again, having that pot of money available for different priorities is going to be something that has been beneficial to the town in the past, and we believe would be beneficial in the future as well. And a portion of the shortfall, again, would potentially be made up during the development process. The next one is general government. So general government has one category in this time, and that is facility development. So the primary project here is the Fire Station 5. So the total cost there is $6.27 million. We are covering that largely with bond dollars, but then Wake EMS is also assumed to be a partner, and that is continuing to be a very likely scenario. So the total cost of the $6.2 million, we'd only be covering about 4.4. And then the police department has also mentioned the possibility of including a shooting range. Currently, they're having a hard time using Wake counties, and has talked about the possibility of getting one for the town so that they can have access and not have to drive or have it kind of on awkward days where they have to use overtime. But at this point, that is an unfunded project, so we'd have to identify a different funding source for that. So the high-level summary here. The referendum would include the funding necessary to develop the fire station, and then we would have to find alternative funding sources for the police shooting range. The next one is stormwater, and because it's just a couple projects, it's a slightly different format. It just shows the different projects. You can see at the top left, we have 2 specific projects and 1 more general. So we've included $250,000 annually in general projects within the referendum, and that's something that the town thinks is going to potentially will likely be necessary in the future as the town's infrastructure continues to age, as we continue to review additional infrastructure and different pipes. We will likely need a recurring funding source, and this is really laying the groundwork for ultimately potentially utility funds that would be able to cover that cost on a recurring basis. But for now, we've included it in the referendum. Besides for that last piece in the FY 27 through 31, so it gives us a few years to cover that, but we would have to do some work potentially for that long-term cost. We also have the Forest Ridge Road project and the Junction Boulevard project, which have been discussed in Public Works Committee in the past, and those are the most recent funding estimates. And those are projects that are already teed up. It's just a matter of doing them when recommended by the consultant. Summary: the referendum includes funding for 2.25 for general projects, 645 for Forest Ridge, 5 or for Junction Boulevard. But again, we would need to develop a long-term funding strategy to address future stormwater project requirements. Staff does not believe that bond referendums are a good long-term source. That really does need to have some sort of operating funding. And the final category is capital renewal. With capital renewal, it's the perform process, and staff has just started the process of reprioritizing projects. It had not been occurring for a few years because we had a couple large-scale projects, in particular the roof at Avery Street, that we knew were going to jump to the top of the list if funding became available. So now that a recurring funding source has been identified, and that happened at last year's budget, staff is going through and back and reprioritizing these projects. So this is the initial look of what we have, but you might see a different list in the future depending on the work that's done there. And there are a variety of different projects that have been included here, in particular the GPAC roof, which we might need an additional coating to help repair it and some issues it's having. The Avery Street Annex roof repair, there's tennis courts, we also have the natural playground elements, and there are some other things that staff believes will probably end up on this list, in particular some different playgrounds and different items in parks that potentially might make the list. But the good news here is you can see on the revenue source, last year, council committed recurring funding in the multi-year budget. So you can see in FY22, the current plan is for $350,000, ramping all the way up to $525,000 in FY25 and FY26, and that's about the amount staff thinks is going to be necessary to have to basically maintain existing assets. That is a number that will refine. Public Works has purchased a asset management system that we think will give us some data on that and allow us to have more of a programmatic plan in terms of how to do proactive maintenance. But that's we think a realistic ballpark estimate of how much it will cost, and obviously that number will continue to go up as we add new assets into the town's portfolio. So the cap renewable bond summary. Again, adequate funding has been included in the multi-year operating budget. If we continue with the plan, we believe we have identified the appropriate amount of funding. And then again, additional detail will be provided in the future based on staff input in the town's new asset management system. The next thing we want to do here was just highlight the operating projection, and this is going back to what Davenport presented, and it's the multi-year look that we have tried to get council to think about more and more, because the one thing I do want to point out here is we have not included a tax increase in the bond referendum because we have multiple revenue sources, the revenue savings plan. We've allocated some pennies towards bond debt in the past, but the cost associated with maintaining and operating those assets will have an impact. We currently have a 3.5-cent tax increase in FY24. That would be covering a large part of that would be the staffing costs associated with operating the fire station. But then there's anticipated to be some level of cost potentially with the new parks, and then the maintenance of existing assets in the future. So while we don't have a tax increase associated with building everything based on the structure that we have and how we've gone about it with the revenue savings plan, we will have potentially tax increases in the future to actually operate those the things that we're constructing. So just wanted to highlight that. This is something that we will continue to refine as part of the budget process. Some of the revenue estimates have not been updated as much as we would like in terms of detail. I have updated sales tax because it was so different than what we had originally projected in interest income, but we are still waiting from Wake County on the ad valorem taxes or real estate. And when we get those, we'll have a much better feel of how we're looking in FY22. And then obviously that'll have a trickle effect into the future. So still some work to do here and we'll refine it. But the big takeaway is that we do have some tax impact in the future based on the construction of these assets. So next steps, staff requires, again, feedback from council on the recommended projects and funding levels. Council will have an additional opportunity to review the CIP against the town's strategic priorities at the upcoming retreat. But staff is planning on utilizing this version unless council recommends otherwise. So this is really something, this is the baseline plan that staff thinks makes sense at this point, based on the funding that's available within the amount that Davenport has provided. So we do need some feedback if council wants to see it look at a different way or wants us to look into different projects. And then staff will provide a final update at the March work session with additional detail and update from Davenport if necessary. That's something that they're going to be looking at, our year-end actuals associated with the audit, and then also some updated projections. So if there is a dramatic change, we'll have Davenport come back. But we will not have much time between March and May, obviously. So we would need to have a really strong baseline, as we've already discussed, to make sure that we don't have to make too many changes. So with that, I'll take any questions that council has on the CIP or the process in general.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Franks. Covered a lot of territory and a lot of items and a lot of money in a short period of time. And from my understanding, I think council is committed to a bond issue to get any number of these items done. It's a matter of perhaps picking and choosing and making some priorities of how much we can do. But lest I come any further, I will give council an opportunity for questions, comments, and I'll start with Mayor Pro Tem Behringer.
I don't have any questions at this point.
Okay. I will go to Mr. Singleton.
I appreciate the information that's been presented, and you do some thinking on this. I think, Michael, you said we need to be able to nail this down sometime in March so we can move forward with the information to start working toward bond council. That's got to start, I think, sometime in May, 6 months before the vote, before the bond referendum is held. So thanks for the information, the way you presented the information. I got a few questions, but I'm not going to ask. I won't ask them now. There's no need to get into the weeds right now. But thanks for the input.
Okay,
Yes, sir. And just to clarify, March would be the final time, but yeah, any input that council can provide right now would be appreciated so that staff can do the work necessary to refine estimates and such. So,
okay. If I have something that need to refine, I'll make sure I send you an email. I've got a couple questions about some things. I may do that.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Matthews?
Great presentation. And it's like everybody said, there's a lot to digest here. And we're going to do a lot of soul searching, try to do some prioritizing and come up with something that's going to be presentable to the voters of the town that they'll buy into and be very specific where those bonds are going to. So we've got our work cut out, but that's what we're here for.
Okay, Mr. Vance?
Thank you for the presentation. I have no questions at this moment.
Okay, thanks, sir. And Mr. Dellinger?
Yeah, you don't have to do it tonight, but I think it'd be helpful for council to know what a 1 cent increase in the tax would generate in terms of revenue and how much debt, that additional debt service that would cover, and how much more debt we could take out just as a reference point. That would be really helpful. The other is, and this is kind of for my own information, so we have this park rehabilitation element, and then we've got capital renewal, and there's some park elements in there. What's the difference between how are they chosen to be in one versus the other?
The way I try to think about it is more large-scale projects would actually be in park rehab. So bigger projects where replacement of a playground or smaller items would be in the perform list of the capital renewal. So it's really just scale of the projects is how I've tried to break it down.
Okay. Yeah, I was curious because there was some playground or park equipment in the capital renewal. So I just wanted to, if it could be consolidated all under parks. I didn't know if it was because there's some public works elements. I wasn't sure. But it'd be nice to have all the park stuff kind of together. The other is the transit budget. I know we've got BRT stuff. We've got this Go Raleigh stuff / Go Garner. And then the circulator loop is all that's included in this. And then I know we would need to do some type of public transportation work down 50 towards the veterans clinic, the VA clinic. And so I'm wondering, have all those projects and the costs that we're going to incur, I know the bulk of it won't be our costs, but I know there'll be some costs associated with those projects that we'll need to bear. And I'm not sure how they're reflected in these sort of long-term projections.
I'm not familiar with, I'm familiar with the project. I have not been involved in discussions in terms of how much the cost would be. And I see Mr. Hodges popping up, so maybe he has some input on the down towards 50 with the veterans.
So at this point, we don't have, so BRT would be fully funded out of the Wake Transit Plan. So unless there's projects near there that we want to participate in, we wouldn't be programming anything for that. The circulator loop that council's discussed recently, and we'll have the final plan for your adoption coming up soon. The $720,000 that is currently in the CIP is just for infrastructure, like stations and so forth for that. The operation of that, which is you've seen an estimate that could be as much as $500,000 to $1 million per year, depending on the schedule. That is strictly an operating budget exercise, so it wouldn't be a part of the CIP. It is not currently programmed into an operating budget at all. So even the 5-year model that Mike showed you that has a tax increase in 2024 to cover operating costs, that still does not include any Garner circulator cost estimates. And we are, you'll hear an update from Gabby soon with a schedule of working with Raleigh for cost refinement and then also applying for grant application for that process. And then insofar as how service might extend down 50, we've not even gotten far enough along with the development of that project to really dive into what the needs are there and what the abilities even are. So the short answer is we won't need any operating costs for BRT and any cost later or future spurs to Dredden's project or to Amazon, which is a similar concept. None of those operating costs are included in our projections.
Yeah, I think we should probably start to include those because I think we want to do it, but I think we need to go ahead and have that in the budget. So we're being aware of it as an upcoming expense. I guess my other question, outside of the circulator loop, there's the Go Raleigh, their routes, and their bus stops at those that I know there was talk of shelters and other things. Are we going to pay for those, or is Raleigh going to pay for those? How does that work?
Raleigh will pay for those. They have a CIP for prioritization of the ones that need shelters, and they're actually building some now. So they're coming down Garner Road, primarily in Raleigh jurisdiction currently, but they're working their way into Garner. We had a refresh meeting with them a week and a half ago just to reprioritize the stops that would get shelters versus which would get improvements like a pad and a bench and a trash can. Those are all in Raleigh CIP. We actually programmed a little heavy. We think the 720 we think is a little heavy for what we would need to start a circulator bus stops for our circulator loop, just because we thought there might be some places where we'd want to add one that's also a Go Raleigh stop, but right. it would be a two-way stop. And we might choose to add one where it's not in Raleigh CIP. So with the exception of those overlaps, those Go Raleigh are in Raleigh CIP, and we're adding probably a little on the heavy side with our projection of what would be needed for stations for the circulator, just so we could make choices about where we want to double up.
All right. Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. That's good information. The other question I had was on the stormwater and there not being a future recommended funding source. Are we going to get some proposals from staff on, I know Mr. Singleton's talked about it before too, as a priority. Are we going to get presented with some options for longer term funding for stormwater? And this year, I mean, there might be next year, but I know these are the priority ones. Is there going to be a proposal coming to us at any point?
Staff would like to start investigating a stormwater utility. I think that the planning to do that would likely go beyond the upcoming budget cycle, and we think it would be a multi-year implementation. So part of the reason for programming some bond dollars in for the next few years was knowing that by the time we plan, get approval to start, and then have the startup years, we'd likely be 3 to 4 years out for having a utility. So we do want to get started. Staff is wanting to work on that and manage it along with other priorities. But we did want to go ahead and have some dollars in the bond, knowing that we wouldn't be able to create a revenue stream immediately.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Mr. Franks, you probably maybe covered this in your presentation, but just sort of clarify for me in the proposal information we have in front of us. Do I understand that the build out or the development of Meadowbrook and Jurgen would not, this proposal would not have enough dollars in it to do both of those, and that we would potentially either have to do that in phases of some kind, or concentrate our build out on one park as opposed to the other, based on this model?
Yes, sir. And Mr. Rollins can potentially jump on and add more in terms of actual cost estimates. But yeah, we believe even with the current funding level, we would have a big delta, and the cost to do both might actually be more than what was currently included. So yeah, I guess there'd have to be a phased approach, or one, and then the other something along those lines with current funding, the current bond funding with no tax increase, or we'd have to take a good amount from other priorities and really go all in on parks if that was something we wanted to accomplish.
Okay, Matt, anything you want to add to that? Or I know we've talked about this a little bit, but
no, I wouldn't add much. I guess I would just say that, well, for one thing, there's some more refinement that needs to happen before we know for sure what those estimates are, but they will almost guaranteed be higher than what we've got in there now. So that, like Mike is saying, the gap will be, a significant issue. But we can also, in addition to talking about phasing or picking one park or the other, we can scale back the design to some degree. I mean, there's a lot of different ways we could approach it. But yeah, we're going to have to make some difficult decisions because there's a lot of good projects in the parks category and elsewhere, and more than we'll have money to do.
okay. Thank you very much. And do I understand that, the presentation tonight is the foundation of what we're going to do moving forward, and that unless council gives some specific direction otherwise tonight, that we anticipate, again, in March at the work session there, having sort of a final update, and that will pretty well put us on the path of some final decisions and final amounts. Did you say Davenport would come back and make a presentation or not? That's only if we need them to or want them to.
Yeah, that's correct. And council will have an additional opportunity at at your retreat, but that's not going to be a main component of it. It'd be more high level, is my understanding. So if there are any kind of, you wake up tomorrow and have a question, that'd be an opportunity. But yeah, this is the framework, and then the final presentation would be in March. And the thought is that with Davenport looking at our audit and overall performance of the town, if there were any significant changes based on their model, that we would have them come in. But it would ultimately, if there are no significant changes, then we could have them come in, but it would not be incredibly necessary, at least from staff's perspective, to have them.
Okay, thank you very much. Sure enough.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask Mr. Franks a question?
Please, yeah, go right ahead.
Yes, Mr. Dellinger asked what a penny would raise. I believe in the current budget, a penny raises $460,000, roughly, correct?
Yeah, yes, sir.
And then the upcoming budget, would that be a similar number, or is it slightly higher?
It should be higher.
Okay.
It will be higher. It's I don't know how much. Like I mentioned, Wake County hasn't provided any estimates, and then we'd have to figure out how much that would go in terms of borrowing. But it would likely be several $1 million. But again, I've started to work with Davenport on getting that number, and I can get it to you here pretty quickly, hopefully.
Okay, that's good. And one more thing, we talked about the bus loop in Garner. I think we're going to have to make some hard decisions because the operating costs that were shown to us in preliminary budget was $1.1 million for annual operation of that. And we get a grant for 50% of that. So that's $550,000 the town would have to incur. I think that's something we may have to look at, working with Raleigh and Go Raleigh and looking at how to expand that than to get in the bus business anytime in the next few years, because the cost, excuse me, with all these other projects is going to be hard to, let's be a hard one to take, hard one to swallow. But anyway, we got more time to discuss that. But thanks for the update on the penny.
And I'll just make a little clarifying statement, Greg, for our viewing audience out there. Since we didn't have you on video at this point, that was Mr. Singleton making the comments. I think
my camera. I'm trying to get.
Okay. I had a problem with mine a little earlier on, so I can appreciate that. But anyway, yeah, go ahead, Phil.
Just one question. Since we do have our retreat coming up, and this is somewhat as the discussion is going here, it should tie into a lot of what we're talking about. Is that the agenda for that retreat? Are we going to see a preliminary agenda that we need to look at? That we might want to focus more on some items like this versus something else? How quick will we get that agenda so we can look at it and say, well, item, this and this, we really don't need to focus on that much, but here's something we really need to concentrate. And I think the budget and the bonds is most certainly a high priority item. Is what we're going to deal with here. So whoever's making that schedule, as quick as we can get a preliminary agenda on the retreat work session and the estimated times, I think that would be ideal for all of us.
Okay, Mr. Matthews. Yeah, there's been some preliminary discussion with the facilitator to set some parameters for that. But Mr. Dickerson or either one of the assistant town managers care to comment on that? In terms of the agenda itself or making it available to council?
Yes, just trying to turn all my gadgets on here. Yes, so the mayor pro tem and staff, and we've been talking to the consultant about the agenda, and basically going to be a 2-day retreat, but not full days because of it being virtual, and don't think there's going to be an appetite to go 6-8 hours a day virtual. That's going to be difficult, but basically subject matter is going to center around council's vision, especially as a newly formed council, although it's been a year. You hadn't really discussed what the overall vision is as a full body, and then take that and let that craft some of the priorities and some of the projects and how that might sway some things one way or another in the bond. I think the biggest thing is going to be what are the questions going to be and how much money you want to put toward each one, which ones receive higher priority and those type of things. And we have set that baseline like Mike just went over, and we want to know, are you wanting to veer from that any or hopefully not much? But we will have some of that discussion maybe on the last day of the retreat. But we're hoping to have some of that like in March, so some ongoing discussion then too. So it may not all be settled at the retreat.
What are y'all figuring is the priority of the retreat? Apparently you've got a tentative schedule you're looking at. If that's just on the tail end of it, that does concern me a little bit.
Well, I don't have it in front of me, but like I was saying, it's going to center around vision, strategic plan, and how that fits into council goals and bond projects and the bond referendum. So hopefully it'll help tie it all together.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is Mr. Dellinger. I agree with Mr. Matthews. I think that a significant portion of maybe that second day should center around the bond, because in saying that staff needs as much time as possible to get our feedback, to make adjustments if we need them. I think if we wait any longer than past then, it makes it even harder on staff to incorporate our feedback. And I think we do have a lot of discussion we want to have on that. And if we don't, we don't. But if we do, that's a good time, and it's right around the corner to have those conversations as a group.
Okay, thank you for those comments. And again, time-wise, I think, whatever discussion we have at the retreat, and certainly we will have some and maybe more as a result of these comments. But the goal here is to, I guess, after the retreat and by the March work session, to pretty well have the figures pretty well nailed down by then. Am I right on that, Mr. Manager?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
We would need to have some pretty hard decisions made by then, so we can get the information together for the May deadline.
Right. As it relates to agenda, we are anticipating getting something from the facilitator, are we not? And we should have something available for council by way of an agenda sometime when? Soon?
Yes, like I said, I don't have that information right in front of me, but we should be getting it at least by the first week of February, I believe is what.
That's what I was thinking.
Mr. Dickerson, I believe that she committed to having that so that we could circulate it to the council at least at the meeting on the 1st so that we could have some discussion around it under the manager's reports.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks.
So that's next week. Unless we run into a real delay, and we would anticipate something would be available at the Monday meeting. Okay.
Thank
That's correct.
All right. Anything else for Mr. Franks? I think you've covered probably most everything, but if there's anything else, now would be a time to mention it. Okay, hearing none. Michael, anything else, or you covered all you needed to, I guess?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir, very much. A lot to consider and contemplate, and thank you for pulling this together for us, for sure. So,
I think Matt's wanting to say something.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry, if you don't mind. I just wanted to add that this is the last meeting that Mike is with us as a full-time employee. He has agreed to stay on, and so you will see him again, but it'll be in a slightly different status. So just wanted to thank Mike for all the work that he's done over the years that he's been here, and we're a lot better off as a result of his talents.
okay, thank you, Matt. That's well stated, and Michael, forgive me for not making note of that. I know you're.
Oh, you're fine.
You're heading west, I believe, and we will miss your. I'm gonna call it your dry sense of humor sometimes, but your very able presentations, and we've benefited from your expertise. So we wish you well, but we will continue to be having interaction with you in the meantime. So that'll be a positive thing in my view. Anybody else on council care to comment? Okay, very good. Let's move to the last three items, or two items on the agenda, and that is manager reports, and then we'll give council an opportunity to make reports. So, Mr. Manager.
Yes, Mayor, Town Council. I also want to thank Mike for all of his efforts over the years and getting us to look more strategic, more long-term. So a lot of these plans and things we're talking about down the road, he brought some good ideas here that we instituted and just got us to look, not just for next year or 2 years from now, but look further down the road. So appreciate that, Mike. The other thing, we omitted having it in your agenda, but it's basically your upcoming meeting schedule. So you should have a copy of that. Just kind of shows what's coming up for February. And as I always say, it's subject to change, but that kind of gives you an idea of what's coming up on the council agenda.
Okay, yes, I'm holding mine here, printed it off, and I'm supposing all council members, it was in a email message that the town manager sent on the, well, I guess it was just recently, wasn't it? Yeah. So you should have that. Anything else, sir?
That's it for today. I'll have more reports on the first meeting in February.
Okay. All right. Any questions for the manager? All right. Hearing none, we will go to council reports, and I'll start tonight with Mayor Pro Tem Behringer. Can't hear you, Miss Behringer.
She did it again.
Gotcha.
Right.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yesterday, I emailed to everybody yesterday about forms for the town manager's evaluation. It is time to do that, and also sent the manager the form for his own self-evaluation. His anniversary date is February, and we need to get this. We don't need to drag it on as long as we did last year. We didn't finish it until the end of May, and that's just really not appropriate. So I wanted to check with the manager about when he feels like he can have his portion done, because we are supposed to set the date for his evaluation 1 month after he has his portion done. So, Mr. Manager, what do you think?
Let me see. I'm turning my camera back on. I don't normally answer that on camera like this, but
Okay.
was going to say, I think that could be handled through an email message.
I could get it done in the next, couple of weeks. I typically wouldn't start on it till the year ends.
Okay.
February the 12th. So
maybe by the end of the month.
Sure, that'll work.
So we could tentatively plan to actually have the evaluation around the end of February, 1st of March. I'll talk to the town clerk about actual dates, but I wanted to get us to get a feel for exactly when we're going to do it, because letting it drag on last year for 3 months is just too long. So we'll go with that.
I'll shoot for the end of the month.
Right, and for those of y'all that when I emailed the forms to all the council members, please print them off and put them somewhere where you won't lose them, because I'm not going to have time to go back and find them for you later on. And last year that was a little bit of a sticky point. Okay, and then the second thing is I have brought up a time or two the issue that we have not yet updated our planning department development software. Although we allocated money for it 2 years ago, and I would like to have some kind of time frame going forward about when we can expect that to be done. As far as I understand, the planning department is still operating on software from the 90s, and that is not allowing for the most efficient work there. So what sort of time frame? 6 months, 8 months, 12 months? What are we looking at?
I'll let John answer that, but I recall his information from a previous time, very recently, about that, where we're benefiting perhaps by the delay in terms of looking at what some other municipalities are doing and some logistics that they were trying to work through. I don't know if the logistics, maybe I should say obstacles, I guess. But so I got the impression that maybe because of that and some other reasons, there wasn't a particular drop dead time, but I guess he can try to give a summary estimate if you want to, John.
So, Ms. Behringer, we will have to do some reevaluation of software to just select which one of the platforms we're going to go with. Staff started working on that last month. We've got planned monthly meetings this year to work on that. That evaluation process in and of itself could take 6 months to a year, and then begin the implementation process. One of the reasons that we haven't moved forward on that, as I mentioned previously, was the burden on staff, who's going to have to do most of the heavy lifting in terms of getting this implemented, have had some pretty major initiatives like the comp plan and the UDO rewrite, and all of those things have to be taken into consideration. If we put the software in right now, then we're going to have to change it after the UDO is adopted to adapt to the new ordinance. So we're trying to time it out so that we're not overburdening staff who have to do a lot of the heavy lifting on both the UDO rewrite and the software. But we are moving forward with some of the steps in terms of goal setting. IT is working with us on how to help with some project management of the overall project. So I can't give you a timeline tonight other than to say we're just trying to balance this with all the workload that staff has. It'll be a big benefit to our staff when it's done, but it'll also take a lot of time in addition to their regular duties right now to get it implemented.
Well, the fact that it's being worked on is what I wanted to hear, because I understand that you're overloaded. I think that's probably putting it mildly. But as I said, 2 years have passed, and we needed it badly 2 years ago. So its time has come, and it looks like you're headed in that direction. So that's good to hear.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else? All right, I'll go to Mr. Singleton. You need to unmute as well, Ms. Singleton.
Thank you. We're still working on that Tupperware order.
Well, I'll tell you what, it must be a good one, and then I'll come by and pick it up personally if I need to.
Okay. Item that I don't know if Mr. Johnson is still on here, but the work on 40, and in particular at exit ramps 303 John Sausage Road and 301 Highway 70. I was curious, do we know, does the state or whoever doing the contractor, will there be some of the tall area lights at these two intersections? The reason I ask is I drive, of course, all over. Those intersections are heavily traveled. The one intersection at 301 coming off the Garner. That's a very dark intersection. No lights at all. Very dark. Jones Sausage Road is a little more lit, but it's still, with the amount of traffic on that road. I asked Pool Road at the Beltline has it, where 40 splits, 64, and you coming into town splits coming into Raleigh. I go on towns down east on, say, 64. At the town of Tarboro, between exits 486 through exit 485, they have street lights on the road. Even exit 459 on all 64 at Nashville has those lights. And this is something I don't know if it's in the plans. It may be, and that's fine. But this would make for a much, much safer intersections, as busy as those two intersections are and will continue to be. Can we have staff look in to see if there are any plans to put some of these extremely tall area lights on those intersections for the safety? Because I don't understand why they wouldn't be put there. If they put at Pool Road in 540, maybe Raleigh had to pay for it. I think it's well worth the money for the safety that it can at least allow for a better lit intersection. And as busy as those two are. So I'll leave that with staff to see if they can investigate and find out if they know if those are going to be planned at those intersections.
Be happy to look into that.
Thank you. That's all. I got another, Mr. Mayor. I'll just email staff on that, a second one.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Singleton. Okay. I'll go to Mr. Vance.
Mr. Mayor, I don't have any questions tonight.
Okay. Thanks, sir. Mr. Dellinger.
Just a note that there's still COVID testing out at Lake Benson all week. So folks need to check the times on the town's website and get out there and get tested. The county commissioners and the legislative caucus for all the Wake County, all the representatives in the General Assembly had a forum on Friday night and talked about vaccine deployment and talked about a lot of the problems and constraints that Wake County was having just with limited supply. So they're working hard to get as much as they can. They said the county gets 20% and the hospitals get the other 80. And so the county has the hospitals have the lion's share. The other issue is that there are 180,000 people in Wake County over the age of 65, which is more than a lot of counties have total population. So they've got a lot to bite off, but they're working hard to do that. So that's kind of an update on that. So if you need to go to Johnston County to get it or somewhere else, so you can do that too. But Wake's working as hard as they can.
Thank you, Mr. Dillon, for that update. And yeah, I appreciate that. I think I'll be participating. It's either tomorrow or the next day in a virtual update on that. I've forgotten which source it was. I've heard from several places, but you're right in terms of the challenge here in Wake County. I know a lot of people maybe feels as though all the logistics should have been worked out, but it's a massive effort, and I think the officials I know are certainly working diligently to try to get through all the kinks and obstacles and get this thing done. So thank you for that update. Mr. Matthews.
Just one thing, and I think Kathy somewhat alluded to it, with our planning department and the growth and all that's going on, as far as people, developers and companies bringing in potential developments or projects, how are we running on time? Are we running behind? Are we short-handed over there? Or what is the latest as far as timeline or that we're running on these things coming in? Are we pretty much good to go? Are we behind, or what do we need to do?
Yes, sir. We are what we consider fully staffed as of right now, because we've filled the positions. Chris has we signed his last position that staff council approved in this year's budget. It was the delayed start to part the way through the year. That person will be coming on board with that. That gives us all the positions that staff had asked for in development services. So we are greatly appreciative of that. As Jeff mentioned earlier tonight, they are keeping all 4 of what we call our pre-development meeting slots filled every week. That means someone with a new project or idea is meeting with our entire team in a predetermined time slots. And they're using all 4 of those up every week right now. Projects are coming in pretty regularly. And for those developers who are taking staff's input and feedback, most of those submissions are going along pretty well. We will always have a situation, I believe, where as long as people are taking the advice of staff, that we can move them through the process even faster. And sometimes they seem to slow down a bit, but for the most part, I think things are moving through at a very regular pace. And again, we are appreciative of the additional staff that council approved our development services departments adding over the last year or so to be able to keep up.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews. And the only thing I will mention is for those of you in our listening public who maybe gain some solace in some level of entertainment, particularly musical, our GPAC, I think, is doing a reasonably good job of trying to get some virtual presentations out there. The most recent being a sort of a two-person concert by, well, it's three persons, I guess, Neil Paget. And I've forgotten the name of the singer who was doing some Mahalia Jackson music, but
Mary Williams.
Yes, Mary Williams. Excellent presentation. So those things are available online, and you can still, I believe, get to them from our YouTube site. Is that right, Mr. Dixon?
That's correct.
Okay. Just be aware of those. Again, Council, I want to thank you again for this meeting tonight. Obviously, we'll continue to meet virtually here for the foreseeable future until things change in a more positive direction. But and you saw the recommendation from the manager this week about town hall. So stay well, stay safe, and hope to see you all, I guess, virtually on Monday night. So unless there's any other business come before us at this time, I'll entertain a motion that we adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved.